She paid for dinner with her rent money, the same money keeping her disabled brother alive. She didn't know the broke man across from her owned half the city. And when she finally discovered the truth, it wasn't the billions that shattered her heart. It was realizing she'd been nothing but an experiment. If you want to see how far this story travels, drop your city in the comments below, hit that like button, and stay with me until the very end. This one's going to break you before it puts you back together. The wine glass shattered against the marble floor of Miles Harrington's penthouse, sending crimson droplets across the pristine white surface like blood spatter at a crime scene. He didn't flinch, didn't move to clean it up, just stood there at the floor-to-ceiling windows, 63 stories above Seattle, watching the city lights blur through the whiskey haze that had become his nightly companion. 25. That was the number carved into his chest now, right next to the scar tissue his ex-wife had left behind. 25 women, 25 first dates, 25 failures. Behind him, his phone buzzed with another notification, probably his assistant confirming tomorrow's board meeting or his lawyer with another update about the divorce settlement that had finally, mercifully, concluded 3 months ago. Caroline had walked away with $12 million, the Aspen house, and what remained of his ability to trust another human being. But the money didn't hurt. He had plenty of that. $847 million at last count, though he'd stopped paying attention somewhere around the fifth $100 million. What hurt was the memory that wouldn't leave him alone, no matter how much Macallan he poured down his throat. "Did you really think I loved you?" Caroline had laughed, actually laughed, when he'd confronted her about the affair. "Miles, sweetie, I loved what you could give me. There's a difference. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll find another woman who'll pretend just as convincingly as I did. That's what money buys you, isn't it? A really good performance." He'd built a tech empire from nothing, dropped out of Stanford at 19 with an idea and $2,000 in savings, wrote code until his fingers bled, pitched to investors who laughed in his face, lived on ramen and 4 hours of sleep for 3 years straight. By 25, he'd sold his first company for $50 million. By 30, he'd founded Harrington Technologies, now worth $2.3 billion. By 34, he'd married Caroline after a whirlwind romance that felt like a movie. By 37, he'd learned that the movie was a lie. The divorce had taken 2 years. 2 years of lawyers, depositions, private investigators uncovering affairs he'd been too blind to see. The PI's report had listed 7 men, 7, including his former CFO, his personal trainer, and in a particularly cruel twist, his own brother's college roommate. But the affair that finally broke him wasn't with a person. It was with his bank account. The forensic accountants had found it all. The shell companies, the offshore transfers, the systematic siphoning of funds she'd hidden behind shopping trips and charity galas. Caroline hadn't just cheated on him. She'd treated their entire marriage like a long-term investment strategy, with regular withdrawals. So Miles had done what he always did when faced with a problem he couldn't code his way out of. He'd analyzed it, built a hypothesis, designed an experiment. The hypothesis was simple. No woman would love him without his money. The experiment was cruel. Prove it. He'd started 6 months ago, shortly after the divorce was finalized, created an entirely new persona. Mike Harrison, freelance graphic designer, barely making ends meet. He dug through thrift stores for worn jeans and faded t-shirts, found a rusted 2003 Honda Civic on Craigslist for $800, rented a cramped studio apartment in a building that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. And then he'd started dating. The app profile was carefully constructed, decent photos that didn't scream wealth, a bio that mentioned hiking and coffee and figuring things out after a rough patch. He was honest about having a daughter, Sophie, his 8-year-old miracle, the only good thing to come from his marriage. But everything else was a lie. The first date had been with Amanda, a marketing executive who'd seemed genuinely interested until the check came. Miles had performed his signature move, the declined card. Watched her face carefully as he'd fumbled through his wallet, pretending to be mortified, apologizing profusely. Amanda had paid, but she'd never texted back. The second date, Jessica, had actually laughed when his card was declined. "Maybe try getting your finances together before dating," she'd said, and walked out before dessert. The third, fourth, fifth, each one a variation on the same theme. Some were polite about it, others cruel. A few had seemed genuinely sympathetic at first, only to ghost him within days. One woman, Brittany, had actually told him to his face, "Look, you're cute, but I'm not looking for a project. I need someone who can keep up." Keep up with what? He'd wanted to ask. Brunch reservations? Weekend trips to Palm Springs? The endless social climbing that passed for ambition in certain circles? But he hadn't asked. He just smiled, thanked her for her honesty, and added her name to the list. 25 names now, 25 women who'd proven his hypothesis correct. 25 data points confirming what Caroline had taught him. Love was transactional, and he was a fool for ever believing otherwise. Miles drained the last of his whiskey and finally turned away from the window. The penthouse stretched around him, 4,500 square feet of carefully curated emptiness. The designer had called it minimalist modern. Miles called it what it was, a very expensive coffin for a man who was still technically alive. His phone buzzed again, and this time he checked it. A text from his mother. "Sophie misses you. She asked when Daddy's going to stop being sad." What am I supposed to tell her, Miles? He closed his eyes against the guilt that knifed through him. Sophie. His beautiful, brilliant, too perceptive Sophie, who'd been living with his parents for the past 6 months because he couldn't figure out how to be both a father and a man drowning in his own bitterness. The custody agreement gave him full rights. Caroline had surrendered them without a fight, apparently unable to see her daughter as anything more than an inconvenient reminder of a marriage that had served its financial purpose. But knowing he had the right to raise his daughter and actually being capable of doing it were two different things. "I'll pick her up this weekend," he texted back. "Tell her I love her." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. His mother was probably deciding between a lecture and a prayer. She'd been deciding between those two options a lot lately. Miles set down his phone and walked to the bathroom, avoiding his reflection in the mirror as he splashed cold water on his face. He didn't need to see what he'd become. He already knew. Hollow-eyed, harder around the edges, running on caffeine and spite, and the particular kind of determination that came from having nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, he had a board meeting. Next week, a product launch. Next month, another round of investor meetings for the AI subsidiary he'd been developing for 3 years. And sometime in between, he'd probably go on date number 26. Because the experiment wasn't done. Couldn't be done. Every time he thought about closing the app, deleting the fake profile, accepting that maybe Caroline was right about everything, he'd remember her laugh. That cold, cutting laugh that said he was a fool for ever believing someone could want him for anything other than his wallet. So he'd keep testing, keep proving his hypothesis, keep confirming that love was a lie rich people told themselves to feel better about the transactions that governed their lives. Miles Harrington was 39 years old, worth almost $1 billion, and absolutely certain he would die alone. He just hadn't figured out yet whether that was a tragedy or a relief. The Starlight Diner had been serving breakfast to Seattle's early risers since 1957, and Nina Reyes was pretty sure the coffee maker was original equipment. She'd learned to coax it through its morning tantrums the way you'd calm a cranky toddler, gentle words, strategic tapping, and an almost ceremonial patience. "Come on, beautiful," she murmured, giving the side panel a soft pat. "Just give me one more pot. Just one more, and then I'll convince Ramon to finally let me take you apart and see what's wrong." The machine gurgled, sputtered, and, miraculously, began producing something that approximated coffee. Nina allowed herself a small smile of triumph before turning back to the dining room. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, which meant the regulars would start trickling in soon. Mr. Patterson, who'd been coming in for eggs over easy since before Nina was born. The nurses from the hospital 2 blocks over, running on fumes and the desperate hope that caffeine could substitute for sleep. The construction crew that had adopted the corner booth as their unofficial office. Nina had been working at the Starlight for 3 years now, ever since she'd had to drop out of nursing school when everything fell apart. She'd had 1 semester left, 1 semester away from the degree she'd been working toward since she was 16 years old, watching nurses care for her mother during those final months. 1 semester from a career that would have meant stability, benefits, a future. But futures, she'd learned, were luxuries that poor people couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, and she pulled it out to check the message. "Morning, sis. Physical therapy went good yesterday. Dr. Okonkwo says I'm ahead of schedule. Nina's chest loosened slightly, the particular kind of relief that came from good news you'd been too scared to hope for. She typed back quickly. That's amazing, Leo. Rest up today. I'll bring home those fancy pastries you like. You don't have to. I want to. Love you. She slid the phone back into her pocket and allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to feel the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. 3 seconds to acknowledge that even with the good news, Leo's medical bills were still $127,000 and counting. That their insurance had capped out months ago. That the payment plan she'd negotiated with the hospital required $800 a month she didn't have. So she was working double shifts 6 days a week while also bartending 3 nights at the place around the corner. 3 seconds, and then she squared her shoulders and got back to work. Nina! Ramon's voice boomed from the kitchen. Table 4 wants more creamer and I'm elbow deep in hash browns. On it! She grabbed the creamer pitcher and wove through the tables, stopping at 4 with her best customer service smile. The woman sitting there, mid-50s, expensive highlights, the kind of manicure that costs more than Nina's weekly grocery budget, looked up with an expression of profound irritation. This coffee is cold, she announced, as if Nina had personally conspired against her. I'm so sorry about that, ma'am. Let me get you a fresh cup. And the eggs are overcooked. I'll have the kitchen remake those for you right away. The woman's eyes narrowed, scanning Nina's face for any trace of sarcasm or attitude. Finding none, she seemed almost disappointed. See that you do. Nina carried the offending coffee and eggs back to the kitchen, where Ramon raised an eyebrow. Again? The eggs are fine, Nina said quietly. She's just having a bad morning. She's having a bad life, more like. That woman comes in twice a week, sends everything back, and tips like she's doing us a favor by acknowledging we exist. Maybe she's lonely, Ramon snorted. You're too nice, Nina. That's your problem. You're too nice to people who don't deserve it. Being nice costs me nothing, she said, sliding the plate across the counter. Can you remake these just a little softer on the eggs? For you, anything. Ramon cracked 2 fresh eggs onto the griddle. But one of these days, you're going to meet someone who takes advantage of that kindness, and I'm going to have to come out of this kitchen and defend your honor. My honor can defend itself, Nina laughed, but I appreciate the backup. By the time the breakfast rush hit, Nina had served 37 customers, refilled countless coffees, and talked Mr. Patterson through his concerns about his daughter's upcoming wedding. Her feet ached, her lower back was staging a rebellion, and she still had 4 hours left on her shift before she could go home, shower, and head to the bar for her evening job. But she was smiling, genuinely smiling, because Leo was ahead of schedule in physical therapy, and that meant maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. She was clearing plates from table 7 when the bell above the door chimed and a new customer walked in. Nina didn't notice him at first, just another figure in her peripheral vision, probably looking for a seat at the counter. But something made her glance up, and when she did, she found him staring at her. Not in a creepy way, she amended quickly. More like surprise. Like he'd been expecting something and found something else entirely. The man was tall, over 6 feet, she guessed, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it too many times. His clothes were deliberately casual. Worn jeans, a gray t-shirt that had seen better days, a jacket that might have been nice once but was now faded at the seams. He had the kind of face that would have been handsome if it weren't so tired. Sharp jawline, gray-blue eyes, but shadows underneath that spoke of sleepless nights. Sit anywhere you like, Nina called out, gesturing to the mostly empty dining room. I'll be with you in just a sec. He nodded and slid into a booth by the window, pulling out his phone but not really looking at it. Nina finished clearing her table, dropped the dishes in the kitchen, and grabbed her notepad. Good morning, she said, approaching his booth with a menu. Coffee? Please. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with a rasp to it that suggested either early mornings or late nights. Just black. Coming right up. Need a minute with the menu? He glanced at it briefly, then back at her. What's good here? Honestly, everything, she smiled. But if you want my personal recommendation, the blueberry pancakes are what dreams are made of. Ramon, that's our cook. He's been making them for 30 years, and I'm pretty sure he sold his soul for the recipe. Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe. or curiosity? Pancakes it is, then. Excellent choice. I'll get that started for you. Nina walked back to the kitchen, put in the order, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. When she returned to his table, the man was staring out the window with an expression she recognized intimately. The particular loneliness of someone surrounded by millions of people and still feeling invisible. Here you go, she said, setting down the coffee. Pancakes will be out in about 10 minutes. Thank you. He wrapped his hands around the mug like he was cold, even though the diner was warm. You've worked here long? 3 years, long enough to know all the regulars and most of their life stories. She tilted her head. You're not a regular. No, just passing through, I guess. Well, welcome to the Starlight. I'm Nina. Mike. He hesitated like he was testing the name on his tongue. Mike Harrison. Nice to meet you, Mike Harrison. She meant it too. There was something about him that made her want to know more. Not in a romantic way necessarily, just human curiosity. He looked like someone carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders, and Nina knew that particular posture all too well. Nina, Ramon called. Order up for table 12. That's me, she said. Enjoy your coffee. Pancakes coming soon. She didn't think about the stranger again until 20 minutes later, when she was passing by his table and noticed he was staring at his empty plate like he'd just experienced a religious conversion. Good, she asked. These are... He shook his head. I think you undersold them. Dreams are made of? These are what angels eat for breakfast. Nina laughed, a real laugh, not the polished customer service version. I'll let Ramon know. He loves when people appreciate his art. Are you always this? He gestured vaguely. I don't know. Nice? What do you mean? I mean... He stopped, looking embarrassed. Sorry, that sounded weird. You've been running around non-stop since I walked in, dealing with customers, some of whom are clearly not the friendliest people, and you're still smiling like you actually mean it. Nina considered the question. It was a strange thing to ask, but his tone wasn't mocking, just genuinely curious, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. I guess I just figure everyone's fighting their own battles, she said finally. The woman who complained about her eggs earlier? Maybe she just got bad news from her doctor. The guy who didn't tip last week? Maybe he's worried about making rent. I don't know what anyone else is going through, so I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Even when they don't deserve it? Especially then. Being kind doesn't cost anything. And sometimes... She paused, thinking of Leo, of her mother, of all the nurses and doctors and strangers who'd shown up with compassion when her family was at its lowest. Sometimes kindness is the only thing that keeps people going. The man, Mike, stared at her for a long moment, and Nina suddenly felt exposed, like she'd revealed something she hadn't intended. But then he nodded slowly, and something in his expression softened. Thank you, he said quietly, for the pancakes, and for that. Any time. She pulled out his check and set it on the table. No rush on that. I'll be around whenever you're ready. She was 3 tables away when she heard him call her name. Nina? She turned. Do you... He hesitated, and she watched him visibly steel himself. This is going to sound strange, but would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? Not here, somewhere else. Like, as a... I don't know... A date? Nina blinked. Of all the things she'd expected, this wasn't it. He was already backpedaling. I'm sorry, that was weird. You seem like someone worth getting to know, and I haven't met someone like that in a long time, and... He ran a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything. I can't do expensive dates. The words came out before she could think them through, and Mike looked up sharply. What? Now it was her turn to feel awkward. I want to be up front. I work 2 jobs, I have a lot of responsibilities, and I don't have money for fancy dinners or... She gestured vaguely. Whatever. If that's a deal breaker, I understand. Something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or something more complicated. It's not a deal breaker. Okay, then, yes. I'd like to get coffee with you, Mike Harrison. The smile that spread across his face transformed him. Suddenly, under the exhaustion and the shadows, Nina could see someone who'd forgotten how to be happy and was just remembering. "How about Sunday?" he asked. "I know a park with a coffee cart. Nothing fancy, but the view's pretty great." "Sunday works." She pulled her notepad from her apron and scribbled her number on a blank page. "Here, text me the details." Their fingers brushed when she handed him the paper, and something electric passed between them. Not romantic necessarily, but something. A connection. A recognition of one lonely person seeing another. "Sunday," he repeated, tucking the paper into his pocket like it was something precious. "Sunday," she confirmed. Nina went back to work, and Mike paid his bill, cash, she noticed, with a generous tip, and left. But for the rest of her shift, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted in her universe. She didn't know what it meant yet. She had no idea how much it was going to change everything. Miles sat in his rusted Honda Civic in the parking lot of the Starlight Diner, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. What the hell had he just done? The experiment was supposed to be clinical, controlled. He'd go on dates, conduct his tests, confirm his hypothesis, and move on. 25 data points collected, all supporting the same conclusion. It was supposed to be satisfying, in a bitter sort of way. Proof that he was right to give up on love, right to protect himself, right to trust no one. But Nina Reyes had just upended everything in the span of one conversation. He kept replaying it in his mind. The way she'd smiled. Not the performative customer service smile he'd seen her give other customers, but something realer when she'd talked about the pancakes. The way she'd defended the rude woman with the overcooked eggs. The way she'd said, "Being kind doesn't cost anything." Caroline would have laughed at that. Would have called it naive, sentimental. The kind of thing poor people told themselves to feel better about being poor. But Nina hadn't said it to feel better about anything. She'd said it like it was simply true, as obvious and unremarkable as stating the sky was blue. And when he'd asked her out, when he'd broken his own protocol and asked this stranger on an actual date instead of waiting to match on the app, she'd said the one thing no woman had ever said to him. "I can't do expensive dates." She'd warned him she was poor. Not to test him, not to lower his expectations, but because she'd thought he deserved to know. Like her financial situation was something she needed to disclose, a potential flaw that might make him reconsider. 25 women, and not a single one had ever warned him away from spending money on them. Most had ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. Most had suggested progressively pricier venues as things progressed. But Nina had looked him in the eye and basically said, "If you need someone who can match your lifestyle, I'm not your person." It was honest. It was refreshing. It was terrifying. Miles pulled out his phone and stared at the number she'd given him. He should delete it. Should delete his fake profile, go home to his penthouse, pour himself 3 fingers of Macallan, and forget this ever happened. The experiment was designed to prove women couldn't be trusted, not to find one who might actually be different. But what if she wasn't different? What if this was just a more sophisticated play, a long game instead of a quick hustle? He thought about it, turning the possibility over in his mind. Maybe Nina had clocked him somehow. Maybe she'd recognized him from a magazine cover, despite his thrift store disguise. Maybe the "I can't afford expensive dates" line was calculated to make him think she didn't care about money, when really she cared more than anyone. The thought should have made him feel better. Should have reinforced the cynicism he'd spent 6 months cultivating. Instead, it just made him sad. "Is this what you want?" a voice in his head asked, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his mother. To spend the rest of your life assuming the worst about everyone? To turn every human connection into a test they can only fail? Miles didn't have an answer. He started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, but instead of heading toward his penthouse, he found himself driving to the one person he could trust. Himself, 30 years ago. The storage unit was on the outskirts of the city, a cinderblock facility that charged $50 a month for a 10 by 10 space full of memories he couldn't quite throw away. Miles hadn't visited in over a year, but he still remembered the code for the gate, still had the key on his ring. The unit smelled like dust and old cardboard when he rolled up the door. Inside, stacked against the walls, were boxes he hadn't opened since his mother had shipped them from his childhood home. Report cards, trophies, the journals he'd kept obsessively from age 12 to 20. Miles found the journal from senior year of high school and sat on an upturned crate to read it. September 15th, 2003. Decided today that I'm going to be rich. Not for the money, but because money means freedom. If you're rich, you can do anything, help anyone. Dad wouldn't have to work double shifts. Mom could go back to school like she always wanted. We could fix the car that's been breaking down for 6 months. He turned pages, watching his younger self's handwriting evolve from messy adolescence to slightly neater young adulthood. March 3rd, 2004. Got into Stanford, full scholarship. Mom cried. Dad pretended he wasn't crying, but I saw him. This is it. This is the beginning of everything. June 12th, 2004. Graduation today. Valedictorian speech. I said that success isn't about what you accumulate. It's about who you become and who you help along the way. Mom recorded it on the camcorder. She said she's going to watch it every time she misses me. Miles closed the journal and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. When had he become someone that 18-year-old would be ashamed of? He'd wanted to be rich to help people, to create something meaningful, to prove that someone from his background could make it on brains and determination alone. And he'd done all of that. Built a company that employed thousands, funded scholarships for kids like him, donated millions to causes he believed in. But somewhere along the way, he'd also become cruel, bitter. So consumed by Caroline's betrayal that he'd decided to spend his nights designing experiments to prove the worst about strangers. Nina's voice echoed in his memory. Being kind doesn't cost anything. Miles put the journal back in its box and drove home. Not to the penthouse, to his parents' house, 40 minutes outside the city, where Sophie was probably just finishing dinner. His mother answered the door with an expression of surprise that quickly shifted to concern. Miles? Is everything okay? I want to see Sophie, he said. And then, I think I need to talk to you and Dad. Of course, honey. She's in the living room. We were just... But Miles was already past her, walking toward the sound of his daughter's laughter. Sophie was curled up on the couch with his father, watching some animated movie he didn't recognize. When she saw him, her face lit up like a sunrise. Daddy! She launched herself at him, and Miles caught her, lifting her into a hug so tight it hurt. Hey, Bug, he murmured against her hair. I missed you. I missed you too. She pulled back to study his face with the uncanny perception only children possess. You look different. Different how? I don't know. Less sad, maybe? Miles felt something crack in his chest. 8 years old, and she'd already learned to read his moods like weather patterns. What kind of father had he been, that his daughter had to track his emotional storms? I'm working on it, he said. I'm really working on it, Soph. Okay. She seemed to accept this with the easy grace of someone who hadn't yet learned to hold grudges. Do you want to watch the movie with us? It's about a girl who can talk to animals. It's really good. I'd like that. Miles sat on the couch with his daughter tucked against his side, half watching the movie and half thinking about the woman he'd met that morning. The way she'd smiled, the way she'd extended kindness without expecting anything in return. The way she'd looked at him like he was a person instead of a problem to solve or a wallet to empty. He thought about Sunday, about the park with the coffee cart and the pretty view. He thought about the lie he was going to have to maintain, the fake name, the fake job, the fake struggle, the test he'd designed to catch women being gold diggers. And for the first time since Caroline, Miles felt something other than anger and suspicion. He felt ashamed. Quote, Nina got home at 11 p.m., which was actually early for her. The apartment was dark except for the glow from under Leo's door, which meant he was still up reading, a violation of his physical therapist's orders, but not one she had the heart to enforce. She knocked softly. Hey, you should be sleeping. I was. Leo's voice came back, muffled. Then I woke up. Then I figured, if I'm awake anyway. Nina pushed open the door. Her 17-year-old brother was propped up in his hospital bed, the one that insurance had actually covered back before they'd hit the cap, with a tablet balanced on his lap and textbooks spread around him like fallen soldiers. AP Chemistry? SAT Prep. He made a face. Mrs. Rodriguez wants me to take it in October. That's 3 months away. You've got time. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who... He stopped, pressing his lips together. Not the one who what? Leo was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. Not the one who's trying to prove they're more than this. He gestured at the wheelchair parked beside his bed. Nina felt her heart crack. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of his mattress, careful to avoid jostling the IV port they'd had installed last month for his regular infusions. Leo, look at me. He did, reluctantly. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're brilliant, genuinely, actually brilliant, and the wheelchair doesn't change that. Mrs. Rodriguez isn't pushing you to take the SAT to prove something. She's pushing you because she knows you're going to crush it, because you're going to get into a great college and do incredible things, and she wants to be able to tell everyone she knew you when. It's hard, Leo admitted. Everyone at school, they look at me different now, like I'm fragile, like I'm going to break. Let them look. You know who you are. I know who you are. And anyone who can't see past the chair isn't worth your time anyway. Leo managed a small smile. When did you get so wise? Comes with the territory. Being your big sister means I had to develop wisdom faster than normal people. Ha ha! Nina stood and kissed his forehead. Get some sleep, I mean it. Your body needs rest to keep healing. Okay. He started gathering his books. Hey, Nina. Yeah? You know, I appreciate everything you do, right? The extra shifts, the everything. I know it's a lot. And I know you gave up nursing school because of me. I gave up nursing school because our situation required it, Nina corrected gently. Not because of you. There's a difference. Still, I'm going to pay you back someday. When I'm a hotshot engineer making Silicon Valley money, I'm going to buy you a house with a big kitchen and one of those fancy espresso machines you always look at in magazines. Nina felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. I'm going to hold you to that. You better. She turned off his light and closed the door, then stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the darkness settle around her. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people if they were very careful about their elbows. The rent was $800 a month, which was actually a bargain for Seattle, but still ate most of Nina's income. Add in utilities, groceries, Leo's medications that insurance no longer covered, the $800 monthly payment to the hospital. She did the math in her head, the way she did every night. Tips from the diner, hourly wage from the bar, the occasional weekend catering gig she picked up when she could. It was never quite enough. Never a buffer, never a cushion, never the luxury of a single unexpected expense. If the car breaks down, she thought, we're done. But she pushed that thought away, the way she always did. Worrying about things she couldn't control was a waste of energy, and energy was something she couldn't afford to waste. Instead, she thought about Sunday, about the man in the diner with the sad eyes and the worn jacket, about the way he'd looked at her when she'd talked about kindness, like she'd offered him a glass of water in a desert. It had been a long time since Nina had let herself think about romance. Between work and Leo and the constant low-grade terror of financial ruin, dating felt like a luxury reserved for people with stable lives. The last guy she'd gone out with, almost 2 years ago now, had disappeared the moment she'd mentioned her brother's condition. Apparently a girlfriend with a disabled sibling and no money was more baggage than he'd signed up for. But Mike hadn't asked about any of that. He'd asked about the pancakes. He'd asked why she was nice to people. And when she'd warned him she couldn't afford fancy dates, he'd smiled like she'd given him the best news he'd heard all day. Nina allowed herself, just for a moment, to hope. Then she took a shower, set her alarm for 5 a.m., and fell into a dreamless sleep. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, which was standard for Seattle, but still felt like an editorial comment on Miles's emotional state. He stood in front of his closet in the penthouse, staring at the rows of designer suits and cashmere sweaters, then deliberately walked past them to the corner where he kept his Mike Harrison wardrobe. Faded jeans, a flannel shirt that had been through the wash too many times, his beat-up sneakers. He added a rain jacket that looked like it came from a discount store, but it actually cost $800, one compromise he'd allowed himself against the Seattle weather. He checked his reflection and saw a stranger staring back. Not Miles Harrington, tech mogul, and frequent Forbes interviewee. Just Mike, a guy figuring things out, someone who might deserve a chance with a kind woman from a diner. The lie sat heavy in his stomach, but he pushed it down. This is the experiment, he reminded himself. This is the test. If she's like the others, you'll know soon enough. But another voice, quieter and more dangerous, whispered, "What if she's not?" He met Nina at the coffee cart in the park at noon. She was already there when he arrived, standing under a giant oak tree with 2 cups in her hands, looking like something out of a painting. She'd dressed simply, jeans, a cable-knit sweater, boots that had seen better days. But her smile when she spotted him was brighter than the hidden sun. "I got here early," she said, handing him one of the cups. "Hope you don't mind. I wanted to make sure they didn't run out of the good stuff." "You bought coffee?" "It's like $3. I think I can handle $3. She bumped her shoulder against his playfully. "You look worried." "Don't be. We're starting as we mean to go on, right? Equal footing." Miles stared at the cup in his hands, momentarily lost for words. 25 dates. Not one of them had ever bought him anything, even coffee. "Thank you," he managed. "You're welcome. Now," she gestured toward a path that wound through the park. "Show me this view you promised." They walked for a while in comfortable silence, sipping their drinks and watching the other park-goers. Families with strollers, couples walking dogs, a group of college students throwing a frisbee despite the drizzle. Nina asked him about his week, and Miles spun his practice cover story about freelance design work and a demanding client who kept changing their mind. It was strange how easily the lies came now. 6 months of practice had made him fluent in his false identity, but every time Nina smiled at something he said, every time she laughed at one of his jokes, the guilt twisted a little tighter. "What about you?" he asked, steering the conversation away from himself. "How's work?" "Work is work," she shrugged. "Diner's been busy. Good for tips, bad for my feet. The bar's been slower, but that's normal for this time of year." "You work at a bar too?" 3 nights a week. "Maria's? On 5th? Mostly a neighborhood crowd. They're good people." Miles tried to calculate how many hours she must work in a week. "That sounds exhausting." "It is what it is." She said it without self-pity, just statement of fact. "I've got responsibilities. Bills don't pay themselves." "Family responsibilities." Nina was quiet for a moment, and Miles worried he'd pushed too hard. But then she said, "My brother Leo, he's 17. He had an accident a couple years ago. Motorcycle hit him while he was walking home from school. Severed his spinal cord at L1. "I'm sorry," Miles said, and meant it. "Don't be. He's amazing. He's going to graduate high school next year, probably with honors. His physical therapist says he's doing better than anyone expected. He's got his whole life ahead of him." She paused. "It's just expensive. Keeping him alive, I mean. Keeping him healthy. Insurance covers some of it, but not enough. Never enough." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I had 1 semester left in nursing school when it happened. Had to drop out to take care of him, to work enough to cover the bills. Sometimes I think about going back, finishing my degree. But I can't figure out how to make the math work." Miles felt something shift in his chest. "You gave up your career for him." "I didn't give up anything," Nina said firmly. "I made a choice. Leo's my brother. He's my family. When our mom died, I promised her I'd take care of him. That's not a sacrifice, it's just what you do." They'd reached the viewpoint Miles had mentioned, a clearing at the top of a small hill that looked out over the city, and beyond it, the gray waters of Puget Sound. Nina stopped to take it in, her face soft with wonder. "You were right," she said. "This is beautiful." Miles wasn't looking at the view, he was looking at her. She's real, he thought. She's actually real. 25 women who'd wanted his money. 25 failures. 25 data points confirming his worst fears about humanity. And then Nina Reyes, who bought him coffee with tip money she needed for rent, who gave up her dreams to save her brother, who looked at a gray Seattle skyline like it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "Why did you say yes? To coffee, I mean. You don't know me. I could be anyone." Nina turned to look at him, and her expression was thoughtful. "I don't know, actually. Something about the way you asked, maybe. Like you weren't expecting me to say yes. like you'd already talked yourself into being rejected. She paused. And you look sad. In the diner, I mean. You looked like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone be nice to them. That obvious, huh? I'm a waitress. Reading people is kind of my job. She smiled. Plus, the pancakes. Anyone who appreciates Ramon's pancakes like that can't be all bad. Miles laughed despite himself. I do really love those pancakes. See? We've already established common ground. They stood there for a while, watching the city emerge through breaks in the clouds, and Miles felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. There was too much guilt and deception tangled up in this for happiness. But peace. The quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly the right person. Hey, Nina said, bumping his shoulder again. You still with me? Yeah, he said. I'm still here. But for how long? The guilty voice whispered. How long before she finds out who you really are? How long before this test becomes something you can't take back? Miles pushed the voice down and focused on the woman beside him, on her smile, her warmth, her genuine goodness. He'd deal with the truth later. For now, he just wanted one more moment of pretending he deserved her. The first date became a second. The second became a third. Before Miles knew it, 3 weeks had passed, and he'd seen Nina 7 times, park benches and cheap coffee, walks through Pike Place Market, one evening spent sitting on the hood of his rusted Honda watching the sun set over the water. He hadn't tested her, hadn't staged a declined card, hadn't pretended to forget his wallet, hadn't done any of the things his experiment required. Every time he thought about it, every time he pulled out his phone to text her about a nice restaurant that would set the stage for the test, something stopped him. Not yet, he told himself. Just one more date, one more chance to see if she's real. But one more date kept becoming another, and Miles found himself doing something dangerous, falling. He fell for the way she laughed, really laughed, at his terrible jokes, for the way she remembered small things he mentioned, his coffee order, his favorite color, the fact that he'd always wanted to visit Japan, and brought them up later, proving she'd been listening. For the way she talked about Leo with such fierce protectiveness, such unwavering love, that Miles felt ashamed of every petty grievance he'd ever nursed. He fell for her kindness, which wasn't performative or strategic, but simply who she was, at the core, fundamentally. And he fell for the way she looked at him, not at the beat-up car or the thrift store clothes or the carefully constructed fiction of his financial struggles, but at him, like she was seeing something valuable underneath all the pretense. The irony, of course, was that the pretense was what allowed her to see clearly. If she'd known about the penthouse, the private jet, the stock portfolio worth nearly $1 billion, would she have looked at him the same way? Would she have let her guard down, shared her fears and dreams and struggles? Or would she have put on the same performance Caroline had perfected? The careful calculation of what to reveal and what to hide, the strategic deployment of affection to secure future returns. Miles didn't know. And that uncertainty gnawed at him, even as the time they spent together grew sweeter. One evening, walking back to his car after another coffee date, Nina stopped suddenly and turned to face him. Mike. Yeah? I need to tell you something. His heart dropped. This is it. She's figured it out. Someone recognized me, or she Googled me, or... I really like you, Nina said. Miles blinked. What? I know we've only been doing this for a few weeks, and I know I barely know anything about your life. You've been pretty private about that, which is fine. Everyone has boundaries, but I wanted you to know. She took a breath. I really like you, and I haven't said that to anyone in a long time, and it scares me, but I thought you should know. Miles stood there, rain misting around them, looking at this woman who'd just handed him her heart, without any expectation of what he'd do with it. Nina, he said, Tell her. Tell her right now. Tell her your name is Miles Harrington, and you're worth $847 million, and this whole thing started as a cruel experiment to prove women couldn't be trusted. But the words wouldn't come. I really like you too, he said instead. More than I know how to say. Nina's smile was like the sun breaking through Seattle's eternal gray. Good, she said. Then we're on the same page. She reached up and kissed him, a brief, sweet press of lips that felt like a promise. And Miles kissed her back, holding her like she was precious, knowing that every moment he didn't tell her the truth was another brick in the wall that would eventually come crashing down between them. But not tonight. Tonight, he just wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd found something real, even if he'd found it through lies. The kiss lingered in Miles's mind for days afterward, playing on repeat like a song he couldn't stop humming. He found himself distracted in board meetings, smiling at his phone during conference calls, losing track of conversations because his thoughts kept drifting back to Nina's face in the rain, the way her eyes had sparkled when she'd told him she liked him. His executive team noticed. His assistant noticed. Even the barista at the coffee shop near his office noticed, commenting that Mr. Harrington seemed different lately, lighter somehow. Miles didn't correct them, didn't explain that the lightness was built on a foundation of sand, that every happy moment was shadowed by the lie he couldn't seem to stop telling. 4 weeks into whatever this was, Nina invited him to meet Leo. "It's a big deal," she said over the phone, her voice carrying that particular mix of excitement and nervousness he'd come to recognize. "I don't introduce Leo to people I'm dating, like ever. The last guy I brought home was in college, and that was a disaster." "What happened?" "He spent the whole dinner talking about himself, ignored Leo completely, and then asked me afterward if my brother's condition was contagious." She laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Needless to say, there was no second dinner." "That's terrible." "It's reality. A lot of people don't know how to handle disability. They get weird about it, or they overcompensate and treat Leo like he's made of glass, or they just check out. It's a good filter, actually. Shows you who someone really is." Miles felt the weight of her words settle over him. She was inviting him into her real life, the part that mattered most, the part she protected fiercely. And he was going to walk in wearing a mask. "I'd love to meet him," he said, because what else could he say? "Saturday? I'll make dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta, some salad. Leo's been dying to interrogate whoever's been making his sister smile so much." "You've been smiling?" "Shut up, you know I have." Miles did know. He'd been smiling too, in ways he'd forgotten he was capable of, and that made everything worse. Saturday arrived too quickly. Miles spent an hour choosing his outfit, which was absurd given that his entire Mike Harrison wardrobe consisted of about 8 items. He settled on his cleanest jeans and a blue button-down that had just enough wear to look authentic. Nina's apartment building was in a neighborhood Miles had never visited, a working-class area where the rents were cheaper and the buildings showed their age. He climbed 3 flights of stairs. The elevator was out of service, according to a handwritten sign that looked like it had been there for months, and knocked on apartment 3B. Nina opened the door, and Miles forgot how to breathe. She was wearing a simple sundress, her hair down around her shoulders, and she looked beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or designer clothes. She looked like home. "Hey," she said, smiling. "You found it." GPS is a wonderful thing. Come in, come in. Leo's in the living room. He's been practicing his intimidating older brother face all day, even though I keep telling him he's the younger one and it doesn't work that way." The apartment was small but warm, filled with the kind of personal touches that made a space feel lived in. Photos on the walls, books stacked on every available surface, a throw blanket draped over a worn couch. The smell of garlic and tomatoes drifted from the kitchen, and somewhere, music played softly, something acoustic and mellow. "Mike?" Leo's voice came from the living room, and Miles turned to see a teenager in a wheelchair regarding him with sharp, assessing eyes. The mysterious coffee date guy, finally putting a face to the name. "Leo." Miles crossed the room and extended his hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "Likewise." Leo's handshake was firm, his gaze unwavering. "Nina says you're a graphic designer." "Freelance, yeah." "Cool. What kind of stuff do you design?" Miles launched into his practiced cover story. Websites, logos, the occasional app interface, while Leo listened with an expression that was either interest or skepticism. Probably both. The kid was smart. Nina had mentioned his academic achievements, his determination to succeed despite everything working against him. "You any good?" Leo asked when Miles finished. "I like to think so." "Show me something, on your phone, something you've designed." Miles felt his stomach drop. This was a detail he hadn't thought through. Of course, a 17-year-old would want to see proof, would want to verify the claims. He pulled out his phone, stalling, mind racing. Most of my work is under NDA, he said, which was technically true for his real work. Clients don't like their projects floating around before launch. Convenient. Leo, Nina called from the kitchen, her tone warning. What? I'm just asking questions? Isn't that what big brothers are supposed to do? You're my little brother. Semantics. Miles laughed despite himself. It's fine, Nina. He's right to be protective. He turned back to Leo. I can show you some concept work, stuff that didn't go anywhere, so there's no NDA. He pulled up a design app on his phone and quickly sketched something. A rough logo concept, nothing special, but enough to demonstrate basic competence. Miles had actually learned a fair bit about graphic design over the years. When you ran a tech company, you picked up things. Leo studied the sketch, then nodded slowly. Not bad. You've got decent instincts for composition. Thanks, I think. That was a compliment. Don't get used to it. Dinner was simple but delicious. Spaghetti with homemade sauce, salad with a tangy vinaigrette, warm bread that Nina admitted came from the day-old rack at the grocery store but tasted perfect anyway. They sat around a small table that barely fit the three of them, and Miles found himself relaxing into the warmth of their conversation. Leo, it turned out, was as brilliant as Nina had described. He talked about his college plans, engineering, maybe robotics, his favorite subjects, physics, AP chemistry, anything with numbers, his frustrations with a school system that didn't know how to accommodate his needs without treating him like he was fragile. The worst is when teachers act surprised that I can keep up, he said, stabbing at his pasta. Like, I'm in a wheelchair, not brain damaged. My legs don't work. My mind is fine. People make assumptions, Miles said carefully. It's not right, but it's human nature. Yeah, well, human nature sucks sometimes. Leo, Nina said again. What? It does. But he was smiling now, the sharp edge softening. Sorry, I know I'm being intense. It's just been a long week. What happened? Leo glanced at Nina, something passing between them. Just medical stuff, the usual. Leo had his regular infusion on Tuesday, Nina explained. It always takes a lot out of him. I'm fine, Leo insisted. Just tired and cranky, apparently. You're not cranky. You're 17. There's a difference. Miles watched them banter, watched the easy affection that flowed between them despite the teasing, and felt something tighten in his chest. This was what family looked like. Not the cold formality of his parents' house, not the transactional relationship he'd had with Caroline, but something real. Something worth protecting. Something he was going to destroy when the truth came out. After dinner, Leo excused himself to his room, claiming homework, but probably just giving them privacy. Nina started clearing dishes, and Miles stood to help. You don't have to do that, she said. I want to. They worked side by side at the sink, Nina washing, Miles drying, in a comfortable silence that felt more intimate than any conversation. Through the window above the sink, Miles could see the building next door, close enough to touch, and beyond it the glow of the city against the night sky. He likes you, Nina said eventually. Leo? He spent half of dinner grilling me like I was a suspect in a crime. That's how you know he likes you. If he didn't care, he wouldn't bother with the questions. Miles set down the dish he was drying. Nina. Yeah? He wanted to tell her. The words were right there, pressing against his teeth, demanding release. She was standing so close, her shoulder brushing his, trusting him completely. And he was lying to her. Every moment, every smile, every kiss was built on a lie. I had a really good time tonight, he said instead. Thank you for inviting me. Nina's face softened. Thank you for coming. I know it's a lot, meeting family this early. But I wanted you to see this is my life, you know? This apartment, Leo, the juggling act. This is what you're getting into if we keep doing this. I know. And you're still here. I'm still here. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. You're different, Mike Harrison. Different from anyone I've ever dated. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to reveal some fatal flaw that explains why you're single. But so far, So far? So far, you just seem like a genuinely good person who's had some bad luck. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. He turned away, pretending to focus on the dish rack, unable to meet her eyes. Hey, Nina's hand on his arm, concerned. Did I say something wrong? No, you didn't. He took a breath. I'm not as good as you think I am, Nina. I've done things I'm not proud of, made choices that hurt people. Everyone has. Not like this. She was quiet for a moment, studying him. Do you want to tell me about it? Yes. Yes, he wanted to tell her everything, wanted to rip off the mask and show her who he really was, and beg her to understand why he'd done it. But if he told her now, he'd lose her. He wasn't ready to lose her. Not yet. Someday, he said, when I figured out how to explain it. Okay? She didn't push, didn't demand, just accepted his boundaries the way she accepted everything else, with grace and patience and a trust he didn't deserve. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. Miles pulled her into a hug, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the lingering smell of tomato sauce and something uniquely Nina. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her hair. Let me be the judge of that. Later, walking back to his car, Miles felt the familiar war raging inside him. The experiment was supposed to prove that women couldn't be trusted, that love was transactional, that he was right to build walls around his heart. But Nina wasn't proving anything except that he'd been wrong. About her, about kindness, about the possibility of genuine connection in a world that seemed designed to crush it. He should end the experiment, should come clean, accept the consequences, and hope that what they'd built was strong enough to survive the truth. But he was a coward, and cowards, he'd learned, always found reasons to wait just one more day. The following week, Miles made a decision he'd been avoiding for months. He picked up Sophie from his parents' house and brought her to his actual home, the penthouse she'd lived in before the divorce, before everything fell apart. Sophie walked through the door and stopped, her small face taking in the space she hadn't seen in over a year. Miles watched her, heart aching, as she processed the changes. New furniture, different art on the walls, the absence of her mother's touches that had once made this place feel like a family home. It looks different, she said finally. I redecorated after everything. It's nice. But her voice was flat, non-committal. Where's my room? Miles led her down the hall to the door he'd kept closed since Caroline left. Sophie's room was exactly as she'd left it. The purple walls she'd picked out at age 5, the shelf of stuffed animals, the small desk where she used to do her homework. I didn't change anything, he said. I wanted it to feel like yours whenever you came back. Sophie walked to her bed and sat down, running her fingers over the familiar comforter. I missed this bed. Grandma's guest bed is too hard. You can come back anytime you want, Bug. You know that, right? This is still your home. Is it, though? She looked up at him with eyes that were far too old for 8 years. You haven't really been here either, Daddy. You've been somewhere else. Miles sank onto the bed beside her. I know. I'm sorry. Are you done being sad now? It was such a simple question, delivered with the directness only children possess. Miles thought about how to answer it, thought about the complicated mess of grief and anger and self-destruction he'd been wading through for the past year. I'm working on it, he said finally. I met someone who's been helping me remember how to be happy. Sophie's eyes widened. You have a girlfriend? I don't know if I'd call it that yet. We're still figuring things out. What's her name? Nina. Is she nice? Miles smiled, thinking of park benches and cheap coffee and Nina's laughter echoing across the water. She's the nicest person I've ever met. Nicer than Mom? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He chose his words carefully. Your mom and Nina are very different people. And whatever happened between me and your mom, Bug, she loves you. You know that, right? Sophie shrugged, a gesture that was somehow both childlike and heartbreakingly adult. Mom's busy. She's always busy now. Miles knew what busy meant. Caroline had moved to New York after the divorce, ostensibly for a job opportunity, but really to escape the wreckage of their marriage. She called Sophie once a week, sent gifts on birthdays and holidays, but the phone calls had gotten shorter over time, the gifts more impersonal. His daughter was learning at 8 years old what it felt like to be abandoned by a parent, and he'd been so consumed by his own pain that he'd almost done the same thing. "I'm not going to be busy anymore," Miles said, pulling her into a hug. "I'm going to be here, really here. I promise." "Pinky promise?" He held out his pinky, and Sophie wrapped hers around it with the solemnity of a sacred vow. "Pinky promise," he said. That weekend, Miles took Sophie to the park. Not the one where he met Nina for coffee dates, but a different one, with a playground and ice cream vendors, and the kind of controlled chaos that children thrived in. He pushed her on swings, caught her at the bottom of slides, bought her a cone with 3 different flavors that dripped down her arm faster than she could lick it. And he told her about Nina. Not everything, not the experiment, not the fake identity, not the lie that sat like a stone in his stomach. But he told her about the diner, the pancakes, the way Nina smiled like the world was worth believing in. "Can I meet her?" Sophie asked. Miles hesitated. "Someday, when things are a little more settled." "What does that mean?" "It means I have some things I need to figure out first, grown-up things." Sophie rolled her eyes with all the dramatic flair of an 8-year-old. "Grown-up things are always so complicated." "You're not wrong. If she makes you happy, Daddy, you should keep her. That's what Grandma says. Find the people who make you happy and don't let go." Out of the mouths of babes, Miles thought. If only it were that simple. But as he watched his daughter skip ahead toward the playground, sticky fingers and chocolate-smeared cheeks and all, he made a silent vow. He would tell Nina the truth. Soon. Before this went any further, before they got any deeper, he would find the courage to come clean. He just needed a little more time. Time, however, was running out faster than he knew. The restaurant was Nina's idea, a modest Italian place in her neighborhood, the kind of spot with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles, and prices that wouldn't break the bank. She'd wanted to celebrate something, she said. Her promotion to head waitress at the diner, a small raise that would make the math slightly less impossible each month. Miles agreed because he couldn't say no to her, but dread pooled in his stomach as he got dressed that evening. This was it. The test he'd designed 6 months ago, the experiment that had failed 25 times before. He'd been avoiding it with Nina, finding excuses, telling himself he just wanted to enjoy what they had before introducing the ugly variable of money, but he couldn't avoid it forever. And part of him, the wounded, suspicious part that Caroline had created, needed to know. Would Nina pass? Or would she fail like all the others? They met at the restaurant at 7. Nina was already there, seated at a corner table, radiant in a dress he hadn't seen before. She stood when she saw him, and he kissed her cheek, breathing in her perfume, trying to memorize everything about this moment in case it was one of their last. "You look beautiful," he said. "You clean up pretty nice yourself." She tugged at the collar of his button-down. "Is this new?" "Thrift store special, $3. She laughed, and they sat down, and for a while everything was perfect. They ordered wine, the house red, Nina insisted, nothing fancy, appetizers, entrees. They talked about her promotion, about Leo's latest test scores, about the funny customers she'd dealt with that week. Miles listened and nodded and asked questions, but part of his mind was already racing ahead to the check, to the moment of truth, to the decision that would determine everything. "Hey," Nina said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "You okay? You seem distracted. Just tired. Long week. Want to talk about it?" He shook his head. "Tonight's about celebrating you, your promotion, your hard work. You deserve this, Nina." Her smile was soft, grateful. "I don't know about deserve. I just show up and do my job." "You do so much more than that. You hold your entire family together. You take care of everyone around you. You gave up your own dreams to make sure Leo has a future." He squeezed her hand. "That's not just showing up. That's heroism." Nina's eyes glistened. "Stop. You're going to make me cry in public." "Would that be so bad?" "It would ruin my mascara, and I spent 20 minutes on it." They both laughed, and the tension in Miles's chest eased slightly. Whatever happened next, he told himself, at least they'd had this. These weeks of connection, of growing closeness, of something that felt terrifyingly like love. The check came, and Miles reached for his wallet with practiced casualness. Inside were 2 cards, a prepaid Visa with a $50 limit that he used for his Mike Harrison purchases, and behind it, carefully hidden, his actual credit card, a black Amex with no limit whatsoever. He handed the waiter the prepaid card and waited. 30 seconds later, the waiter returned, an apologetic expression on his face. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Miles felt the blood drain from his face. Not acting, genuine panic, because the stakes were suddenly real in a way they'd never been with the other 25 women. He fumbled through his wallet, pretending to search. "I don't understand," he said, letting his voice carry genuine distress. "There should be plenty on there. He pulled out his phone. "Let me check my balance. There must be some mistake." "Mike." Nina's voice was calm, steady. "It's okay." He looked up. She had her own wallet out, a worn leather thing that had seen better days, and she was pulling out bills. Cash. Not a credit card, not a check, but actual folding money, 20s and 10s that she counted out with practiced efficiency. "Nina, no, you can't. This was supposed to be my treat." "It's fine." She handed the cash to the waiter with a smile. "Keep the change." "But that's your—" Miles stopped, remembering that he wasn't supposed to know about her financial situation in that much detail. "That's too much. Let me Venmo you when I figure out what happened with my card." "Don't worry about it, seriously." She reached across the table and took his hand again. "These things happen. Technology glitches, it's not a big deal." Miles stared at her, waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the disappointment, the judgment, the careful calculation of whether he was worth the investment. That's what the others had done. Some obviously, some subtly, but all of them eventually. But Nina just smiled at him like nothing had changed. "Hey," she said, "stop looking so stressed. It's just money. It's your money. Money you need." "I need a lot of things. But right now what I needed was a nice dinner with my boyfriend, and that's exactly what I got." She squeezed his hand. "So thank you for being here, for celebrating with me. That matters more than who pays the check." Boyfriend. She'd called him her boyfriend, and she'd just paid for their dinner with money she'd earned working double shifts, money that should have gone toward her brother's medical bills, money that represented hours of her life spent on her feet serving difficult customers. 25 women had failed this test. 25 women had shown him, in that moment of revealed poverty, exactly who they really were. Nina had just shown him too. Miles excused himself to the bathroom and stood at the sink, gripping the porcelain, staring at his reflection in the mirror. What was he doing? This woman, this incredible, generous, genuine woman, had just used her rent money to buy him dinner. She'd done it without hesitation, without judgment, without a single expectation of repayment. And he'd let her. He'd designed a test to catch gold diggers, and Nina had proved she was the opposite. She wasn't after his money. She didn't even know he had money. She liked him, loved him maybe, for who he pretended to be. A struggling graphic designer with a complicated past and no prospects for wealth. But who he pretended to be wasn't real. And when she found out the truth, she wasn't going to see the experiment's conclusion. She was going to see the cruelty behind it. The arrogance. The assumption that she, like every other woman, couldn't be trusted. Miles splashed cold water on his face and made a decision. He would tell her, tonight, right now, before this went any further. He walked back to the table, resolve hardening with each step. Nina looked up at him, still smiling, and his heart clenched. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" "Nina, I need to tell you something." Her smile faltered slightly. "That sounds serious." "It is." He sat down, took her hand. "I haven't been completely honest with you, and His phone rang. The ringtone he'd assigned to his mother. Loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. "Sorry, let me just—" He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. 3 missed calls from his mother, plus a text. "Call me immediately. Sophie." "I have to take this," he said, already standing. "I'm sorry, something's wrong." Nina's expression shifted immediately from confusion to concern. "Go, call, I'll wait." Miles stepped outside and dialed, his hands shaking. "Miles!" His mother's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Sophie fell off the playground equipment. We're at Seattle Children's Hospital. She's conscious, but they think she might have broken her arm." I'm on my way. He hung up and stared at his phone for a moment, the weight of the evening crushing down on him. Sophie needed him. His daughter needed him right now, immediately, and Nina was waiting inside for a confession that would have to wait. He went back in, grabbed his jacket. I'm so sorry. There's been an emergency with my... He caught himself before saying daughter. With my family. I have to go. Of course. Nina stood, gathering her things. Do you need me to come with you? No, I'll call you later. I'm sorry about everything. The card, the dinner, the... Mike. She put her hand on his chest over his racing heart. Go. Take care of your family. We can talk later. He kissed her, quick and desperate. And then he was out the door, running to his car, driving to the hospital where his real life waited to remind him of everything he'd been trying to escape. Sophie was in the pediatric wing when he arrived, her small arm wrapped in a temporary splint, her face tear-streaked but brave. His parents were there, his mother wringing her hands, his father pacing the hallway. Daddy! Sophie's voice broke when she saw him, and Miles swept her into his arms, careful of her injured limb. I'm here, Bug. I'm here. What happened? I was climbing the big structure, and Tommy Miller dared me to go higher, and I slipped. She sniffled. It hurts. I know, sweetheart. The doctors are going to fix it, okay? They're going to make it all better. The next few hours blurred together. X-rays, consultations, the diagnosis, a clean break of the radius, no surgery needed, just a cast in time. Sophie was fitted with a hot pink cast that she insisted on despite Miles's suggestion of purple, and by midnight, they were cleared to go home. Miles carried his daughter to the car, his mother following with an overnight bag. She should stay with you tonight, his mother said. In her own room. She's been asking for it. Miles nodded. I know. I'll take care of her. Miles, his mother's hand on his arm, stopping him. I don't know what's been happening with you lately. You seem different, less lost. Whatever it is, whoever it is, don't let it slip away. Sophie needs you present. Not just physically, but really present. I'm working on it, Mom. Work faster. He drove Sophie to the penthouse, carried her to her purple room, and sat with her until she fell asleep. Then he checked his phone, finally, and found 3 texts from Nina. The first, is everything okay? Let me know when you can. The second, I'm worried about you. Please just text me that you're all right. The third, I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. No pressure, just, I care about you, Mike. Whatever's happening, you don't have to face it alone. Miles stared at that third message for a long time. You don't have to face it alone. When was the last time someone had said that to him and meant it? Not his lawyers, who were paid to be on his side. Not his business partners, whose concern was always tinged with self-interest. Not Caroline, whose every word had been calculated for effect. Nina meant it. She barely had enough money to cover her own bills, was working herself to exhaustion to keep her brother alive, and she was offering to shoulder his burdens too. He typed back. Sophie broke her arm. She's okay. I'm sorry I had to leave. The response came immediately. I'm so glad she's okay. And I'm glad you told me about her. I'd love to meet her someday. Miles's thumb hovered over the keyboard. The confession that had been interrupted at the restaurant was still there, pressing against his chest, demanding release. But not like this. Not over text. Not at midnight. Not when his daughter was sleeping in the next room with a broken arm. Someday soon, he typed. I promise. Then before he could stop himself, I think I'm falling in love with you, Nina. A long pause. Then, I think I already fell. Miles sat in the darkness of his penthouse, surrounded by wealth and privilege and all the things that were supposed to make life easier, and felt tears slide down his face. He was falling in love with a woman who didn't know his real name. A woman who'd paid for their dinner with tip money. A woman who deserved so much better than the lie he'd been living. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow, he would start figuring out how to make this right. But tomorrow, like all his other tomorrows, kept getting pushed further away. 3 weeks passed. Sophie's arm healed. The lies continued. Miles told himself he was waiting for the right moment, that perfect window of time when he could confess everything and somehow make Nina understand. But the right moment never seemed to arrive. Instead, life happened. Sophie started spending weekends at the penthouse. adjusting to having her father back in her life. Leo had a setback with his treatment. Nothing serious, but enough to send Nina into a spiral of worry that Miles couldn't add to. Work demands piled up, quarterly reports, a product launch, an investor meeting that couldn't be postponed. And through it all, his relationship with Nina deepened. They fell into a rhythm. Coffee dates on Sunday mornings, now sometimes including Sophie, who'd begged to meet Daddy's friend and had taken to Nina immediately. Dinners at Nina's apartment, where Leo grilled Miles about everything from his fictional design career to his intentions with his sister. Late-night phone calls where they talked about everything and nothing, voices soft in the darkness. Miles learned the texture of Nina's life, the way she stretched a single bag of groceries into a week of meals, the creative solutions she'd developed for Leo's care when insurance fell short, the quiet devastation she felt every time she passed the community college that offered the nursing program she'd had to abandon. And Nina learned about him, or at least the version of him he'd created. Mike Harrison, the struggling freelancer who'd been through a bad divorce and was trying to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. A man without resources, but with plenty of heart. The irony wasn't lost on Miles. He designed his Mike Harrison persona to test women, to see if they could love a man without wealth. But in becoming Mike, he'd also become more honest about things that mattered. His fears, his regrets, his hopes for the future. The wealth had always been a barrier, he realized, a wall that kept people from seeing who he really was. Nina had gotten past that wall. She knew the real Miles in every way except the one that mattered most. One Saturday afternoon, Nina asked if she could come over to Mike's apartment. Miles panicked. His fake studio had been a prop, rented for appearances but barely furnished, and made an excuse about construction in the building. Instead, he suggested they meet at the park, their usual spot, with Sophie. Sophie was delighted to have Nina's full attention. They played on the swings together, made elaborate sandcastles in the sandbox, shared ice cream cones that melted faster than they could eat them. Miles watched from a bench, heart full and aching at the same time. "She's wonderful," Sophie said later after Nina had left to pick up Leo from physical therapy. "I want her to be my stepmom." Miles choked on his coffee. "Bug, it's complicated." "Why?" "Because I've been lying to her since the day we met. Because she thinks I'm broke when I'm actually worth almost $1 billion. Because when she finds out the truth, she's going to hate me." "Grown-up reasons," he said weakly. Sophie rolled her eyes. "Grown-up reasons are always so stupid." She wasn't wrong. That night, lying awake in his penthouse bedroom, Miles finally admitted what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He couldn't keep this up. The longer he waited, the worse the betrayal became. Every day he spent with Nina as Mike Harrison was another day of deception, another brick in the wall that would eventually crush them both. She deserved the truth, deserved the chance to decide whether she wanted to be with Miles Harrington, tech billionaire, not just Mike Harrison, lovable failure. And yes, she might walk away. Might decide that the lie was unforgivable, that the test he designed was cruel beyond redemption. He would deserve it if she did. But at least he would have been honest. At least he would have given her the choice. Miles picked up his phone and typed out a text. "Can we meet tomorrow? Just us. There's something important I need to tell you." Nina's response came moments later. "Of course." "Our bench? Noon?" "Our bench." The spot in the park where they'd had their first real conversation, where they'd watched the sunset and talked about dreams and disappointments and everything in between. Where he'd first started to realize that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't the lie he'd convinced himself it was. "Perfect," he typed back. "See you then." He didn't sleep that night, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing conversations that all ended the same way, with Nina's face crumpling into hurt and betrayal, with her walking away, with him losing the best thing that had happened to him in years. But he had to try, for her sake, for Sophie's sake, for his own sake, because he couldn't keep being a man who lived on lies. Tomorrow, he would tell her everything, and whatever came next, at least it would be real. The morning of the confession arrived gray and heavy, the kind of Seattle weather that seemed to mirror Miles's internal state. He stood at his penthouse window, watching the clouds press down on the city, and tried to remember how to breathe. In 3 hours, he would sit across from Nina on their bench and tell her everything. The real name. The billions. The experiment designed to prove that women couldn't be trusted. The 25 failures before her. The fact that every moment of their relationship had been built on a foundation of lies. He'd rehearsed the conversation 100 times throughout the sleepless night, and every version ended the same way, with Nina's face shifting from confusion to hurt to something that looked a lot like hatred. Miles showered, dressed, and stood in front of his closet for 20 minutes trying to decide what to wear. Did he go as Mike Harrison one last time, in the thrift store clothes that had become his costume? Or did he show up as himself, Miles Harrington, in the designer clothes that reflected his actual life? In the end, he chose something in between, dark jeans that could have been expensive or cheap, depending on how you looked at them. A simple white button-down, no watch, no visible markers of wealth. He wanted her to see him, not his money. Wanted the conversation to be about who he was, not what he owned. Sophie was with his parents for the day, a planned arrangement that now felt providential. Whatever happened at the park, Miles didn't want his daughter to witness the fallout. He arrived early, 45 minutes before noon, and sat on their bench watching joggers pass. The coffee cart was already open, and he considered buying 2 cups the way Nina had done on their first date here. But that felt wrong somehow, like he was trying to soften the blow with caffeine and nostalgia. Instead, he just waited. At 11:52, he saw her. Nina was walking down the path toward him, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing the same sundress she'd worn the night she'd introduced him to Leo. She was smiling, that open, trusting smile that had first made him believe maybe the world wasn't as broken as he'd thought. Miles stood as she approached, and she kissed him. A brief, sweet press of lips that tasted like goodbye, even though she didn't know it yet. "Hey, you," she said, settling onto the bench beside him. "You sounded serious in your text. Everything okay? I need to tell you something. I figured, you've got that look again." "What look?" "The one where you're carrying something heavy and trying to figure out how to set it down without breaking anything." She reached over and took his hand. "Whatever it is, just say it. I'm not going to run away." Miles wanted to believe her, wanted it so badly his chest ached with it, but he knew better. He knew what was coming, knew how she was going to react when she understood the full scope of his deception. "My name isn't Mike Harrison." The words came out flat, rehearsed, nothing like the eloquent confession he'd planned. Nina's brow furrowed in confusion. "What?" "My name is Miles Harrington." He watched her face, waiting for recognition to dawn. Harrington Technologies was one of the largest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. His face had been on magazine covers, in newspaper profiles, on the evening news when the company went public 3 years ago. She had to know, had to have seen his picture somewhere. But Nina just looked puzzled. "Okay, so you go by Mike instead of Miles. That's not really—" "No, I mean—" Miles took a breath. "I've been lying to you. About everything. My name, my job, my life. I'm not a freelance graphic designer. I'm the founder and CEO of Harrington Technologies. I'm worth—" He almost couldn't say it. "I'm worth about $850 million. Silence. Nina stared at him, her expression frozen somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Miles forced himself to continue. "I was married before. You know that part. But my ex-wife didn't just cheat on me. She married me for my money. I found out after we divorced that our entire relationship was basically a financial strategy for her. She never loved me. She just loved what I could give her. Miles, so I started this experiment." The word tasted bitter in his mouth. "I created Mike Harrison. Rented a crappy apartment, bought a beat-up car, dressed in thrift store clothes, and I started dating. I wanted to see if any woman could love me without the money. I wanted to prove that Caroline was right, that love was just a transaction, that I was a fool for ever believing otherwise." Nina's hand was still in his, but he could feel her fingers going cold. "I went on 25 dates," he continued, unable to stop now that he'd started. 25 women, and every single one of them failed. They found out I was broke, and they disappeared. Some were polite about it, some were cruel, but they all left. And I thought, I was sure, that you would be the same. So you tested me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The restaurant, when your card got declined." "Yes." "And I paid, with my tip money." "Yes." Nina pulled her hand away. The loss of contact felt like a physical wound. I was going to tell you that night, Miles said quickly. Right after it happened. I knew you were different. I knew you'd pass the test, and I was going to come clean. But then my mother called about Sophie, and I had to go to the hospital, and you waited 3 more weeks. I kept looking for the right moment. I know that sounds like an excuse, but it is an excuse. Nina's voice had gone flat. All the warmth drained out of it. It is exactly an excuse, Mike. Miles, whoever you are. Nina, please, do you have any idea? She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth, and for a terrible moment Miles thought she was going to cry. But when she looked at him again, her eyes were dry and hard and filled with something that hurt worse than tears. Do you have any idea what these past few months have been like for me? She said. I work 80 hours a week trying to keep my brother alive. I gave up my entire future, nursing school, a career, everything I'd been working toward, because Leo needed me. I count every penny. I budget every meal. I lie awake at night doing math in my head, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. I know how hard, but you don't know anything. She stood up, and Miles stood with her. You have $800 million. You have never, not for 1 second of your life, had to worry about making rent. You have never had to choose between groceries and medication. You have never had to tell your little brother that maybe next month you can afford the therapy he needs. Nina, and you looked at me, at my life, at everything I'm struggling with, and you thought, good test subject. You watched me count out my tip money to pay for your dinner, money I needed for Leo's prescriptions, and you thought, oh good, she passed. The words hit him like physical blows. Because she was right. She was exactly right. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I know how this sounds. Do you? Do you really? Nina laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because here's what I heard. I'm a billionaire who got hurt by his ex-wife, so I decided to hurt random women to make myself feel better about it. And you were the lucky winner. That's not... But it was. It was exactly what he'd done. I fell in love with you, Nina. That part was real. Everything I felt, everything I said about how you made me feel, that was all true. How would I know? She threw her hands up. How would I know what's true? Your name was a lie. Your job was a lie. Your apartment, your car, your whole life, all lies. You told me you understood struggle. You commiserated about money problems. You let me worry about paying for dates when you could have bought the entire restaurant without noticing. I wanted you to see me, not my money. No, you wanted to see me. You wanted to watch me, evaluate me, decide if I was good enough to be let in on the secret. Her voice cracked, like I was auditioning for a role I didn't even know I was up for. Miles reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't. Nina, please. I know I messed up. I know I handled this all wrong, but what we have, what we built, that's real. You know it's real. I don't know anything anymore. Tears were streaming down her face now, and she swiped at them angrily. I thought I knew you. I thought you were this good, kind man who was struggling like me, who understood what it meant to fight for something. I introduced you to Leo. I let you into my life, my real life, the one I protect from everyone. And the whole time you were playing a game. It wasn't a game. Not after the first date. Not after I realized what? That I was worthy? That I passed your little test? She shook her head. Do you hear yourself? Do you understand how cruel that is? Miles had no defense. No argument. Because she was right about everything. I'm sorry, he said again, knowing it wasn't enough. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. You hurt me, Miles. She said his real name like it was poison. You looked at me and you saw someone to test, to evaluate, to judge. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that I actually fell for it. I fell in love with Mike Harrison. I thought he was special. I thought he was different. I am different. I can be different. If you'll just give me a chance, no. The word was final, absolute. I can't do this. I can't look at you and wonder what's real and what's another test. I can't spend every moment of our relationship waiting for the next shoe to drop. Nina, don't contact me. Don't come to the diner. Don't call me. Don't text me. I need... Her voice broke. "I need to never see you again." She turned and walked away. Miles stood frozen, watching her go, watching the best thing in his life disappear down the park path and out of sight. He wanted to run after her, wanted to grab her arm and make her understand that he loved her, that he would do anything to fix this, that he would spend the rest of his life making it up to her if she'd just give him the chance. But he didn't move, because she'd asked him not to contact her. And if he chased her now, after everything else, he'd just be proving that he didn't respect her boundaries, that his feelings mattered more than her wishes, that she was right not to trust him. So he stood there, alone on their bench, and let her go. The walk back to his car felt endless. Every step was weighted with the memory of better days. The path they'd strolled while talking about everything and nothing, the coffee cart where she'd surprised him with a cup on their first date, the spot where she'd kissed him for the first time. He'd destroyed it all. Every good memory, every precious moment, tainted now by the lie underneath. Miles drove home on autopilot, barely registering the traffic, the stoplights, the familiar streets. When he reached the penthouse, he went straight to the liquor cabinet and poured 3 fingers of whiskey, then stopped himself before he could drink it. That's what the old Miles would have done. The bitter, broken Miles who'd designed an experiment to prove women couldn't be trusted. The Miles who'd let his ex-wife's betrayal poison every relationship that came after. He poured the whiskey down the sink. Then he sat on his expensive couch in his empty penthouse and did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He cried. Great, heaving sobs that tore through him like storms. He cried for Nina, for the pain he'd caused her, for the future they'd never have. He cried for Sophie, who'd asked when she could see Nina again, and would now have to be told that Daddy had ruined everything. He cried for himself, for the man he'd become, for the walls he'd built so high that he'd almost forgotten there was anyone worth letting in. And when the tears finally stopped, when he was empty and exhausted and hollowed out, he sat in the silence and faced the truth. This was his fault. All of it. He'd been so consumed by his own pain that he'd inflicted it on everyone around him. He'd taken his anger at Caroline and spread it across 26 innocent women, demanding they prove something that wasn't theirs to prove. Nina had been right about everything. He was cruel and arrogant, and so wrapped up in his own wounds that he couldn't see the damage he was doing to others. Miles pulled out his phone and looked at Nina's number. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he didn't press it. She'd asked him not to contact her. The least he could do was respect that. Instead, he opened his contacts and scrolled to a different name. His therapist. The one his mother had been begging him to see for months. The one he'd been avoiding because admitting he needed help felt like admitting he was broken. He typed out a message. "I need an appointment, as soon as possible. It's urgent." Then he set down the phone and waited. The first therapy session was brutal. Doctor Okonkwo didn't coddle him, didn't offer easy reassurances, didn't pretend that his pain excused his actions. She listened to the whole story, Caroline, the experiment, Nina, with an expression that was professionally neutral, but somehow still felt like judgment. "So let me make sure I understand," she said when he finished. "You were hurt by your ex-wife's betrayal. Instead of processing that hurt in healthy ways, you designed an elaborate test to prove that all women were gold diggers. You then applied this test to 26 women, including one who paid for your dinner with money she needed for her disabled brother's medical care. And now you're surprised that she's upset? I know how it sounds. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you spent 2 years punishing strangers for your ex-wife's crimes." Miles flinched. "I thought I was protecting myself." "You were, but protection and punishment aren't the same thing, Miles. And neither is self-protection and self-destruction." "What do you mean?" Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. In all those dates, all 26 women, did you ever stop to consider that some of them might have had legitimate reasons for not wanting to date someone with financial problems? That maybe they weren't gold diggers, they were just practical? That a woman who'd been burned by a partner's debt might reasonably be cautious about entering another relationship with someone who couldn't pay for dinner?" Miles opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. "You designed a test with a predetermined conclusion," the therapist continued. "You assumed every woman who failed was motivated by greed. But human behavior is more complicated than that. People have all kinds of reasons for the choices they make." Nina was different. Was she? Or was she just the first one who made you feel guilty enough to question your assumptions? Miles sat with that for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. I really don't know. That's actually a good answer. The fact that you can admit uncertainty is progress. Dr. Okonkwo made a note. Now, let's talk about what you're going to do next. I don't think there's anything I can do. She asked me not to contact her. I'm not talking about Nina. I'm talking about you, your daughter, your life. The patterns of thinking that led you here in the first place. Miles blinked. He'd come to therapy hoping for a magic solution, a way to fix things with Nina, a path to redemption. He hadn't expected the focus to turn inward. You can't control whether Nina forgives you, Dr. Okonkwo said. You can only control the kind of person you become going forward. So here's my question. Who do you want to be, Miles? Not Mike Harrison. That was a fiction. Not the bitter ex-husband running elaborate tests. Who do you actually want to be? It was the hardest question anyone had ever asked him, and for the first time in years, Miles found himself genuinely trying to answer it. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Miles's life. Harder than the divorce. Harder than building his company from nothing. Harder than watching his marriage crumble. Because this time, he couldn't throw money at the problem, couldn't work harder, couldn't design a clever solution. He just had to sit with the wreckage and learn to live in it. He saw Dr. Okonkwo twice a week. She pushed him to examine the beliefs he'd built up since the divorce, the assumptions about women, about love, about trust. It was painful work, like cleaning a wound that had been left to fester. He focused on Sophie, really focused on her for the first time since the divorce. He moved her back into the penthouse full-time, hired a part-time nanny for the days when work was unavoidable, but made sure to be present every morning and every evening. He read her bedtime stories, helped with homework, learned the names of all her friends and their complicated playground dramas. Sophie noticed the change. "Daddy," she said one night, about 3 weeks after the breakup. What happened to Nina? Miles's heart clenched. He'd been dreading this question. We're not seeing each other anymore, Bug. Why not? I made some mistakes. I hurt her feelings. Did you say sorry? I did. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. Sophie considered this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old philosopher. What kind of mistakes? Miles thought about how to explain it to a child. I wasn't honest with her. I told her things that weren't true, and when she found out, she felt like she couldn't trust me anymore. Why did you lie? Because I was scared. Someone hurt me a long time ago, and I thought if I lied, I could protect myself from getting hurt again. That's dumb. Miles almost laughed. Yeah, Bug, it was pretty dumb. Grandma says lies always come out in the end. She says it's better to tell the truth even when it's hard. Grandma's a smart woman. Sophie climbed into his lap, something she'd been doing more often lately, like she was trying to make up for lost time. Do you miss her, Nina? Every day. Maybe she'll forgive you, if you try really hard to be good. Miles hugged his daughter, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Maybe. But even if she doesn't, I'm going to try to be good anyway. For you, for me. Because that's what we're supposed to do. I like that, Sophie said. I like when you try to be good. He held her tighter and didn't let go. At work, Miles threw himself into projects he'd been neglecting. But now, instead of just chasing profits, he found himself drawn to initiatives that mattered. He expanded the company's scholarship program, adding a new track specifically for students who'd had to interrupt their education due to family obligations. He established a foundation for caregiver support, funding respite care and financial assistance for people who'd given up their careers to take care of loved ones. He thought about Nina constantly while doing this work, thought about her abandoned nursing degree, her endless shifts, her exhaustion that she carried like a second skin. He couldn't fix things with her, but maybe he could make things easier for people like her. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't enough. But it was something. His assistant noticed the change. You seem different lately, she said one afternoon, sliding a stack of reports onto his desk. More, I don't know, present, I guess. I'm working on it. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. The board's happier than they've been in months. Miles didn't care about the board's happiness, but he cared about becoming someone his daughter could be proud of, someone he could look at in the mirror without flinching, someone who deserved the kind of love Nina had offered so freely. The hardest part was the evenings. After Sophie was asleep and the penthouse went quiet, Miles found himself staring at his phone, fighting the urge to text Nina, just to see how she was, just to see if Leo was okay, just to hear her voice, even in text form. But he didn't, because she'd asked him not to, and respecting that boundary was the absolute minimum he owed her. Instead, he started journaling, something Dr. Okonkwo had suggested. Every night, he wrote down what he was feeling, what he'd learned, what he wished he could do differently. The entries were messy, sometimes incoherent, often painful, but slowly, gradually, they started to change. The bitterness that had defined him for so long began to soften. Not disappear. He didn't think it would ever fully disappear, but soften. He started to see his divorce not as a defining catastrophe, but as a painful lesson. Caroline had used him, yes, but he'd also chosen her, ignored red flags, prioritized the fairy tale over the reality. He wasn't blameless. And the experiment, that cruel, elaborate test he'd designed, he finally understood it for what it was. Not protection, not self-defense, just pain, looking for someone else to hurt. He'd found Nina, and he'd hurt her. That was his legacy. That was what his wounds had created. 6 weeks after the breakup, Miles's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, probably spam or a wrong number, but something made him look. The message was short. "This is Leo, Nina's brother. We need to talk." Miles stared at the screen, heart pounding. His first instinct was to respond immediately, to say yes to whatever Leo wanted, to grab any thread that might lead back to Nina. But he forced himself to pause, to think. Why was Leo reaching out? Was Nina okay? Had something happened with his treatment? And more importantly, was this a conversation he should have, or was it a violation of Nina's request for no contact? He thought about it for a long time. Then he typed back, "Is Nina okay?" The response came quickly. "She's fine. This is about something else. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's a coffee shop on 15th and Pine, 3 p.m. Miles hesitated. Then, "I'll be there." He spent the rest of the evening trying to figure out what Leo could possibly want. The kid had been protective of Nina from the start, suspicious of Miles's intentions. If he wanted to yell at Miles for hurting his sister, Miles would take it. He deserved it. But something told him this was about more than that. The coffee shop was small and cluttered, the kind of place that catered to college students and artists. Leo was already there when Miles arrived, his wheelchair pulled up to a corner table, a laptop open in front of him. Miles approached slowly, giving Leo time to see him coming. "Hey, sit down." Miles sat. Leo studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He looked older than 17, Miles thought, harder around the edges, the kind of old that came from carrying weights no teenager should have to carry. "I'm going to say some things," Leo began, "and you're going to listen. Don't interrupt, don't explain, just listen." Miles nodded. "My sister is the best person I know. She gave up everything for me. Everything. Her education, her career, her social life, her future. She works herself to the bone so I can have the treatments I need, so we can keep our apartment, so I don't have to worry about anything except getting better." Leo's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking slightly. "She deserves the world, and what she got was you." Miles said nothing. He'd promised to listen. "When she came home that day, the day you told her the truth, I've never seen her like that. She was destroyed, not angry, not crying, just empty. Like someone had reached inside her and scooped out everything that made her Nina." Leo's jaw tightened. "I wanted to find you and hurt you. I wanted to make you feel even a fraction of what she was feeling. I would have deserved it. I said don't interrupt." Leo waited until Miles nodded again. "But I've been watching her these past few weeks, and something weird is happening. She's not getting over you. She's not moving on. She just keeps working, keeps taking care of me, keeps pretending everything's fine while her heart is breaking." Miles felt his own heart crack at the words. "I looked you up," Leo continued. "Miles Harrington, tech billionaire, Forbes profile, Seattle's most eligible bachelor, according to some magazine I'd never heard of." He pulled up something on his laptop and turned it to face Miles. "And you know what I found?" Miles looked at the screen. It was his company's website, specifically the page about the Caregiver Support Foundation he'd launched 3 weeks ago. "You did this?" Leo said. After Nina dumped you, you started a foundation for people like us. People taking care of family members. People who gave up their careers to keep someone else alive. I wanted to help people like her, like you. I'm not done. Leo's eyes were fierce. I also found the scholarship program. The one for students who had to interrupt their education. The one that specifically mentions returning to medical fields. Miles had thought of Nina when he'd written that provision. Had imagined her reading about it, maybe applying, maybe finally getting to finish her nursing degree. Here's what I don't understand, Leo said, leaning forward. You're either the world's biggest jerk, or you're someone who made a terrible mistake and is trying to become better. And I can't figure out which one you are. Maybe both, Miles said quietly. Leo blinked. What? Maybe I'm both. Maybe I was a jerk who made terrible mistakes, and now I'm someone trying to become better. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Leo sat back, considering this. Why did you do it? The experiment. The lies. Why? Miles had answered this question for Dr. Okonkwo, for himself in countless journal entries. But saying it to Leo, to the brother of the woman he loved, felt different. Heavier. I was hurt. My ex-wife used me, lied to me, made me feel like a fool for ever trusting her. And instead of dealing with that pain, I turned it into armor. I told myself that all women were the same, that love was just a transaction, that the only way to protect myself was to test everyone before letting them in. That's messed up. I know. Nina's not like your ex-wife. I know that too. I think I knew it from the first time we talked. She was so genuine, so kind, so completely unlike anyone I'd ever met. Miles's voice caught. But by the time I admitted that to myself, I was already in too deep. The lie had become the relationship, and I didn't know how to tell her the truth without losing her. So you waited, and the lie got bigger. And the lie got bigger, and when I finally did tell her, it was too late. Leo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, She talks about you, you know. When she doesn't think I'm listening, she'll see something on TV or read something in a book, and she'll start to say your name before she catches herself. She's not over you. She's nowhere close to over you. Hope flickered in Miles's chest, dangerous and fragile. She asked me not to contact her. I know. So why are you here, Leo? Why are you telling me this? Leo closed his laptop and met Miles's eyes. Because my sister deserves to be happy, and I'm not sure, but I think you might be the person who can make that happen. If you stop being an idiot about it. How am I supposed to do that when she won't talk to me? I don't know. Figure it out. Leo started to wheel himself back from the table. But if you hurt her again, if you do anything to make her feel the way she felt that day, I will find a way to make you regret it, wheelchair or not. Understood? Understood. Leo nodded once, then headed for the door. He paused just before exiting. She goes to the park sometimes. Your park. Usually Sunday mornings before her shift. She thinks I don't know, but I do. And then he was gone. Miles sat in the coffee shop for a long time, Leo's words echoing in his mind. She goes to the park sometimes. Your park. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't permission, but it was information. Information that Leo had chosen to share, knowing exactly what Miles might do with it. Sunday morning. Their bench. The place where everything had begun and ended. Miles looked at his phone. It was Thursday. 3 days until Sunday. 3 days to figure out what he would say. 3 days to decide if showing up was an act of hope or an act of selfishness. 3 days to become the kind of man who might actually deserve a second chance. Miles paid for his untouched coffee and walked out into the Seattle gray, his heart pounding with something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The 3 days between Leo's revelation and Sunday morning stretched like taffy, each hour pulling longer than the last. Miles moved through his routines mechanically, board meetings, investor calls, dinner with Sophie, sessions with Dr. Okonkwo, but his mind was stuck on a single question. What would he say to Nina if he saw her? He drafted 100 versions of the speech in his head. Apologized in 1,000 different ways. Imagined her face when she saw him, cycled through every possible reaction from anger to indifference to something that looked like hope. Dr. Okonkwo had warned him about this kind of thinking. "You're trying to control the outcome," she'd said during their Thursday session. "You're planning every word, every gesture, as if you can script your way to forgiveness. But that's not how healing works. That's not how relationships work. So what am I supposed to do? Just show up and wing it?" "I'm saying that if you do see her, you need to be present. Really present. Not performing a speech you've rehearsed, not trying to manipulate her into a specific response. Just being honest. Whatever that looks like in the moment. Being honest. The one thing he'd failed spectacularly at for their entire relationship. Friday night, Sophie asked him why he was so distracted. "You keep staring at nothing," she said, her 8-year-old observation skills proving uncomfortably sharp. "Like you're watching a movie in your head." "Sorry, Bug. I've got a lot on my mind." "Is it about Nina?" Miles's heart clenched. "Why do you ask?" "Because you always look sad when you think about her. Your face does this thing." She scrunched up her features in an exaggerated frown. "Like that?" "I don't look like that." "You do. Grandma noticed too. She said you're pining, but I don't know what that means." Miles almost laughed. "It means I miss her." "Then why don't you tell her that?" "It's complicated, Bug." "Grown-up things again?" "Yeah, grown-up things." Sophie climbed into his lap, her default position whenever she wanted to say something important. "Daddy, remember when I broke Emma's favorite crayon at school? The purple one with the glitter?" "I remember." "I was so scared to tell her. I thought she'd hate me forever. But when I said sorry and told her I'd get her a new one, she said it was okay. She said accidents happen and she forgave me." "That's a nice story, Bug. The point is," Sophie looked at him with those serious eyes that were too old for her face, "maybe Nina would forgive you too, if you told her you were sorry, and that you'd do better." "Maybe," Miles said, his throat tight. "I hope so." "Me too. I really liked her." "I really liked her too." Sophie snuggled against his chest. "Then fight for her, Daddy. That's what the princes do in the movies. They fight for the people they love." Miles held his daughter and wondered when she'd gotten so wise, and whether fairy tale advice could work in a world that was decidedly not a fairy tale. Saturday passed in a blur of anxiety. Miles went for a run, trying to burn off the nervous energy, but it didn't help. He cleaned the penthouse, reorganizing shelves that didn't need reorganizing. He called his mother, who immediately sensed something was wrong and spent 45 minutes trying to extract information he wasn't ready to share. By Saturday night, he was a wreck. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. What if Nina wasn't there? What if she was there, but walked away the moment she saw him? What if she'd moved on, found someone else, built a new life that didn't include a billionaire who'd lied to her for months? What if this was his only chance, and he blew it? Around 2 a.m., he finally fell into a fitful sleep, dreaming of park benches and declined credit cards and Nina's face when she'd said she never wanted to see him again. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, because of course it did. Seattle apparently had a flair for dramatic weather when emotional confrontations were on the agenda. Miles dressed carefully. The same outfit he'd worn to his confession, the one that straddled the line between his two identities. He checked on Sophie, who was still asleep, and left a note for the nanny explaining he'd be back in a few hours. Then he drove to the park. He arrived at 7:30, a full hour before the time Leo had mentioned. The park was nearly empty, just a few early joggers and a woman walking her dog. Miles found their bench and sat down, heart pounding, eyes scanning the paths for any sign of Nina. The minutes crawled by. 7:45. 8 Unthink. 8:15. Maybe Leo had been wrong. Maybe Nina had stopped coming. Maybe this whole thing was a fool's errand, a desperate grasp at reconciliation that was never going to work. And then, at 8:23, he saw her. She was walking down the main path, coffee cup in hand, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger, more vulnerable. She was wearing the cable-knit sweater from their first date here, and the sight of it made Miles's chest ache. Nina didn't see him at first. She was looking at the ground, lost in thought, moving on autopilot toward the bench, their bench, the one where they'd watched sunsets and talked about their futures and fallen in love. She was 10 feet away when she looked up and stopped. Miles saw the moment recognition hit. The slight widening of her eyes, the sharp intake of breath, the way her body went rigid as if preparing for fight or flight. "Nina," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, frozen, her coffee cup clutched in both hands like a shield. "I'm not here to—" Miles started, then stopped. He'd promised himself he wouldn't deliver a speech, wouldn't try to manipulate the moment. "I'm sorry. I should go." He stood up, ready to walk away, to respect her boundaries, even though every fiber of his being screamed at him to stay. "Wait." The word was quiet, almost lost in the morning sounds of the park. But Miles heard it. He turned back. Nina was still standing in the same spot, but something in her expression had shifted. The rigid defensiveness had softened slightly, replaced by something more complicated. "How did you know I'd be here?" she asked. Miles hesitated. He didn't want to get Leo in trouble, but he also wasn't going to start this conversation with another lie. "Leo told me," he admitted. "He reached out a few days ago. We talked." "Leo." Nina's voice was flat. "My brother, Leo. He's worried about you. He should mind his own business. He loves you. He wanted to help." "By sending you here? By setting this up?" Nina shook her head. "I told you not to contact me." "I know, and I haven't, not once. But when Leo said you come here sometimes, I thought—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I thought. I just needed to see you, to tell you something, and then I'll go, I promise." Nina stood there for a long moment, clearly wrestling with herself. Then, slowly she walked to the bench and sat down on the far end, as far from where Miles had been sitting as possible. "Say what you came to say," she said. "Then leave." Miles sat back down, maintaining the distance she'd established. His heart was racing, his palms sweating. This was it, his one chance. "I'm not going to apologize again," he began. "I know you've heard it. I know words don't mean anything at this point. So instead, I'm going to tell you what I've been doing since the last time I saw you." Nina said nothing, but she didn't leave. Miles took that as permission to continue. "I started seeing a therapist. Twice a week, sometimes more. Her name is Dr. Okonkwo, and she doesn't let me get away with anything. She's been helping me understand why I did what I did. Not excuse it, but understand it. The patterns I fell into after my divorce, the ways I used my pain as a weapon instead of dealing with it." He paused, watching Nina's face for any reaction. She was staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. "I moved Sophie back in with me. Full time. I'm actually being her father now, instead of hiding in my work and my bitterness. She's doing better. I'm doing better. We have breakfast together every morning and bedtime stories every night." Still nothing from Nina. Miles pushed on. "I started a foundation for caregivers, people who've given up their careers to take care of family members. And I expanded the company's scholarship program to help students who had to interrupt their education. Students like—" He stopped, not wanting to make it too obvious that he'd thought of her. "Like a lot of people who deserve a second chance." Nina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she remained silent. "I'm not telling you this to prove I've changed or to convince you to forgive me. I'm telling you because I want you to know that meeting you, loving you, it changed something in me. Even though I handled everything wrong, even though I hurt you in ways I'll regret for the rest of my life. You showed me what real kindness looks like, what genuine love looks like, and I'm trying to become someone worthy of that, even if I never get to be with you again." Miles stopped. He'd said what he came to say. Now it was up to Nina. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of the waking park, birds chirping, joggers passing, the distant rumble of traffic. Nina sat motionless, her coffee growing cold in her hands, her eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. Finally, she spoke. "Do you know what the worst part was?" Miles shook his head. "It wasn't the money. The billions. I don't care about that. I never cared about that. It wasn't even the fake name or the fake apartment or any of those external lies." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were glistening. "The worst part was realizing that I was a test subject, that every conversation, every date, every kiss was being evaluated, that you were watching me, analyzing me, waiting to see if I'd fail." Nina, let me finish. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I've been tested my whole life. By the world, by circumstances, by people who thought they could measure my worth. When my mom got sick, everyone watched to see if I'd fall apart. When Leo had his accident, everyone waited for me to fail. And I didn't. I held it together because I had to. Because there was no one else. Because falling apart wasn't an option. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And then you came along, and you seemed so real, so honest, so different from everyone else. For the first time in years, I let myself relax. Let myself believe that someone saw me, not my responsibilities, not my struggles, but me. And it turns out you were just another test, another person watching, waiting to see if I was good enough. You were always good enough, Miles said, his own voice breaking. You were more than good enough. You were the only one who passed. That's the point! Nina's composure finally cracked, her voice rising. I don't want to pass tests. I don't want to be evaluated and measured and judged. I just wanted to be loved, for who I am, not for how I perform under pressure. The words echoed across the quiet park, startling a nearby pigeon into flight. Nina pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking, and Miles had never felt more helpless in his life. You're right, he said quietly. You're completely right. And I'm sorry, not just for the lying, but for reducing you to a data point in an experiment that should never have existed. For treating your love like a commodity to be tested instead of a gift to be treasured. Nina lowered her hands, her face streaked with tears. Do you understand how hard it is to trust anyone now? Not just you, anyone. Every conversation I have, I wonder, is this real? Is this person genuine? Or are they running some test I don't know about? I know I broke something that can't be easily fixed. You did. She wiped her face again, composing herself. And I don't know if I can forgive you. I want to, part of me really wants to, but I don't know if I can. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? Miles considered the question. What was he asking for? He told himself he just wanted to see her, to tell her about the changes he'd made. But that wasn't entirely true. I guess I'm asking for the possibility, he said slowly. Not a guarantee, not a promise, just the possibility that someday, when you're ready, we could start over. Not from where we were, from the beginning, honestly this time, with no lies between us. Nina stared at him, and Miles couldn't read the expression on her face. Hope? Skepticism? Exhaustion? You want to start over, she repeated. Yes. As strangers, if that's what it takes. And you think that's possible? After everything? I don't know, Miles admitted. But I know I don't want to give up on us without trying. I know that what we had, what I ruined, was the most real thing I've ever experienced. And I know that I will spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I don't at least ask. Nina was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. I went to your company's website, she said. Last week. I saw the foundation, the scholarship program. I wasn't trying to... I know. Leo told me you didn't mention it, that he had to find it himself. She paused. The scholarship requirements. Interrupted education due to family obligations. Medical fields prioritized. Miles nodded, not trusting himself to speak. You were thinking about me. I'm always thinking about you. Nina closed her eyes, and a fresh tear escaped down her cheek. I don't know what to do with that, Miles. I don't know what to do with any of this. You don't have to decide anything right now. I meant what I said. I'm not asking for a guarantee. I'm just asking you to not close the door completely. And if I can't, then I'll respect that. I'll walk away and never bother you again, but I had to try. I had to let you know that I'm different now, that I'm trying to be the person you thought I was. Nina opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she'd sat down. Miles held her gaze, letting her see whatever she needed to see. I'm still angry, she said. I know. I'm still hurt. I know. And I don't trust you. I know that too. So what makes you think this could ever work? Miles took a breath. Because when you paid for our dinner with your tip money, you didn't hesitate. You didn't complain. You didn't make me feel small. You just did it because that's who you are. And I thought, if someone can be that generous with a stranger, imagine how she'd be with someone she actually trusted. He paused. I want to earn that trust, Nina. I want to spend the rest of my life becoming someone you can count on. The words hung in the air between them. Nina was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, and Miles wanted nothing more than to reach over and wipe them away. But he didn't move. This was her moment, her decision. I can't promise anything, she finally said. I'm not asking you to. And I need time. A lot of time to think about this, to figure out if I can even consider. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. Nina laughed, a wet, broken sound. You'll be here, at this park bench. For how long? As long as it takes. That could be forever. Then I'll be here forever. She shook her head, but there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. A tiny crack in the wall she'd built. A sliver of something that might, in time, become hope. You're impossible, she said. I know. And infuriating. That too. And I shouldn't even be talking to you. Probably not. Nina stood up and Miles's heart dropped. This was it. She was going to walk away and he'd have to accept it, had to respect her choice. But instead of walking away, she paused, turned back to face him. Sunday mornings, she said. I usually finish work at the diner around 10. If you happen to be at the coffee cart at 10:30, Miles's breath caught. Nina, I'm not promising anything. I'm just saying, maybe we could talk. As strangers, starting from scratch. She wiped her face one more time. But if you ever lie to me again about anything, no matter how small, we're done, forever. Do you understand? I understand. Good. She took a step back. I have to get to work. I'm already late. Nina. Miles stood up. Thank you. For listening. For giving me even a chance. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Don't make me regret it. And then she was gone, walking back down the path she'd come from, leaving Miles standing alone by their bench. He watched her until she disappeared around a corner, his heart pounding with something that felt like a second chance. Sunday mornings. The coffee cart. Starting from scratch. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't anywhere close to the relationship they'd had before. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Miles allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, beginnings were enough. He drove home in a daze, replaying the conversation in his mind, analyzing every word, every expression, every tiny shift in Nina's posture. By the time he walked through the penthouse door, Sophie was awake, eating cereal in front of the TV. Daddy! She jumped up when she saw him. Where did you go? I had to talk to someone. Was it Nina? Miles paused, then nodded. Yeah, Bug. It was Nina. What did she say? She said she's willing to try. Sophie's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Really? She's going to give you another chance? Maybe. We're taking it slow, starting over. That's so good, Daddy. Sophie threw her arms around him. I told you if you fought for her, it would work. Miles hugged his daughter back, feeling lighter than he had in months. You were right, Bug. You were absolutely right. Does this mean I get to see her again? Someday. When she's ready. When we've rebuilt something real. How long will that take? I don't know. But however long it takes, it'll be worth it. Sophie squeezed him tighter. I'm proud of you, Daddy. 4 words. Simple words that any parent might hear from any child. But they hit Miles like a freight train. He'd spent so long being ashamed of his divorce, of his experiment, of the man he'd become. He'd convinced himself that he was unworthy of love, unworthy of trust, unworthy of the basic human connections that gave life meaning. But his daughter was proud of him. And Nina, wounded, cautious, still angry Nina, had left the door open. Maybe he wasn't as broken as he thought. Maybe there was still time to become someone worth believing in. Miles held his daughter and let himself hope. The following Sunday, he arrived at the coffee cart at 10:15, nervous as a teenager on his first date. He ordered 2 cups, black for him, with room for cream for her, the way she liked it, and sat down on a nearby bench to wait. At 10:32, Nina appeared. She was still in her diner uniform, her hair escaping from its ponytail, looking tired from her shift. But she was there. She'd come. "Hi," Miles said, standing up as she approached. "Hi." She took the coffee he offered, examining it briefly. "You remembered how I take it." "I remember everything about you." The words came out more intense than he'd intended, and Nina's expression flickered, but she didn't pull away. "So?" she said, settling onto the bench. "Starting from scratch? What does that mean exactly?" "It means, I thought maybe you could ask me anything. Anything you want to know, and I'll answer honestly." "Anything?" "Anything." Nina considered this. "Okay, first question, why tech?" Miles blinked. Of all the questions he'd expected, about his marriage, about the experiment, about his wealth, this wasn't one of them. "Why tech?" he repeated. "Yeah, how did you get into it? What made you start a company instead of just working for someone else?" He understood then what she was doing. She wasn't starting with the hard questions, the painful ones. She was starting at the beginning, getting to know him as if they'd just met. "I grew up poor," he said. "Really poor. My parents worked multiple jobs and we still never had enough. When I was 12, I found an old computer in a dumpster. Someone had thrown it out because the screen was cracked. But I figured out how to fix it, and I taught myself to code using library books and dial-up internet." Nina sipped her coffee, listening. "I realized pretty quickly that code was the great equalizer. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, if you went to a fancy school or taught yourself in a basement. If you could build something useful, someone would pay for it." He paused. "I wanted to build something that would make sure my family never had to worry about money again." "And you did." "I did. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I was doing it. The money became the point instead of the means. I got rich, and I got lost." "What about your parents? Are they still together, still the best people I know? They live outside the city now, a house I bought them when the company first took off. My mom tried to refuse it, said it was too much, but I told her it was the least I could do after everything they sacrificed." Nina nodded slowly. "That sounds like them, the way you talk about them." "They'd like you," Miles said. "My mom especially. She's always saying I need someone who'll keep me humble." "I don't know if I'm the right person for that job." "You're the only person for that job." They sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun breaking through the clouds, warming the cool Seattle air. "My turn," Miles said. "Why nursing?" Nina smiled, small, tentative, but real. "My mom was sick for a long time before she died. Cancer. The nurses who took care of her, they were incredible. Not just medically, but emotionally. They treated her like a person, not just a patient. They held her hand when she was scared. They remembered her favorite foods, her favorite music. They made her feel like she mattered, even at the end." "That's beautiful." "I wanted to be that for other people, to be the person who shows up during the worst moment of someone's life and makes it a little bit better." She looked down at her coffee cup. "I got 3 years into nursing school before Leo's accident. 1 more year and I would have had my degree." "You could still finish the scholarship program." "I know." She held up a hand. "But I'm not ready to talk about that. Not yet. Let's keep things simple for now." "Okay, simple." They talked for another hour, covering topics that ranged from favorite books to childhood memories to embarrassing stories from their teenage years. Miles told her about the time he'd asked his middle school crush to a dance by writing her a poem. Terrible, truly terrible, and reading it over the school PA system. Nina countered with the story of her first waitressing job, where she'd spilled an entire tray of drinks on a customer who turned out to be a food critic. It felt like a first date, a real first date, without pretense or agenda. When Nina finally stood to leave, Miles felt the familiar pang of not wanting her to go. "Same time next week?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Maybe," but she was smiling. "Let's see how this week goes. I'll be here regardless." "I know you will." She paused, something flickering in her expression. "Miles?" It was the first time she'd used his real name without anger behind it. "Yeah?" This was nice. Talking like this. like normal people. It was. Don't ruin it. I won't. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. But this time her posture was different, lighter, less burdened. Miles watched her go, the coffee cups cold in his hands, hope burning warm in his chest. They were starting over, and for the first time he believed they might actually make it. The weeks that followed became a rhythm Miles grew to cherish more than any business success he'd ever achieved. Every Sunday at 10:30, rain or shine, he waited at the coffee cart with 2 cups in hand. And every Sunday, Nina came. Their conversations deepened gradually, like roots growing slowly into soil. The first few weeks stayed surface level: favorite movies, travel dreams, childhood pets. Miles learned that Nina had always wanted to see the Northern Lights, that her favorite comfort food was her mother's arroz caldo, that she'd once rescued a stray cat who lived with them for 12 years before passing away peacefully in his sleep. Nina learned about Miles's obsession with Japanese baseball, his secret love of terrible action movies from the 1980s. The summer he'd spent backpacking through Europe on a budget so tight he'd eaten nothing but bread and cheese for 3 weeks straight. They laughed together, genuinely laughed, the kind that came from the belly, and left tears in the corners of the eyes. And with each laugh, each shared story, each moment of connection, Miles felt the distance between them shrinking. But the hard conversations came too. They had to. On the 5th Sunday, Nina asked about Caroline. "Tell me about your marriage," she said, her voice careful, neutral. "Not the ending, the whole thing. How it started, what you thought it was, why it fell apart." Miles took a breath. He'd known this question was coming, had dreaded it, but had also prepared for it in therapy. Dr. Okonkwo had helped him see his marriage clearly, without the distortion of anger or self-pity. "I met Caroline at a tech conference," he began. "I was 34. The company had just gone public, and I was on the cover of magazines for the first time in my life. She was working as a consultant for one of our competitors, beautiful and smart and charming. When she showed interest in me, I couldn't believe it. Why not? Because women like that had never noticed me before. Growing up poor, then spending my 20s grinding away at a startup, I didn't have time for dating, and honestly, I didn't know how. Caroline was the first woman who made me feel like I'd arrived, like I was finally the person I'd been working so hard to become." Nina nodded, encouraging him to continue. "The relationship moved fast. Too fast, probably. 6 months of dating, a year-long engagement, then the wedding, huge, expensive, exactly what she wanted. I thought I was being romantic, giving her everything she asked for. I didn't realize I was just writing checks." "When did you start to suspect something was wrong?" Miles thought about this. "Honestly, looking back, there were signs from the beginning. She was always more interested in the lifestyle than in me. Parties, vacations, the right social circles. I told myself it was just how wealthy people lived, that I was being paranoid because of my background. But deep down, I think I always knew." "Then why did you stay?" "Pride, mostly. I didn't want to admit I'd been fooled. And Sophie, when she was born, I thought maybe things would change. Maybe becoming parents would bring us closer." He shook his head. "It just gave Caroline another reason to spend money. Designer baby clothes. The most expensive preschool in Seattle. Everything had to be the best, the most impressive. Our daughter became an accessory." "That's horrible." "It was. And I let it happen. I was so focused on building the company, on proving that I deserved my success, that I didn't pay attention to what was happening in my own home." Miles paused. "When I found out about the affairs, I wasn't even surprised. Devastated, yes, but not surprised. Some part of me had been waiting for the other shoe to drop." Nina was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for telling me that." "You asked." "I know, but it couldn't have been easy to say." "Easier than lying about it." Miles met her eyes. "I'm done lying, Nina. About anything. Even the stuff that makes me look bad." She held his gaze, something shifting in her expression. "I believe you." 3 words, simple words, but they meant everything. On the 8th Sunday, it was Nina's turn to share. "I want to tell you about my mom," she said, staring at her coffee cup instead of at him. "About what it was like at the end." Miles waited, giving her space. She was diagnosed when I was 20, Leo was 14, breast cancer stage 3. The doctors gave her 2 years, but she was stubborn. Nina smiled, but it was sad. She lasted 4. 4 years of chemo and radiation and surgeries and hope and disappointment and hope again. That must have been exhausting. It was. But also, and I know this sounds strange, it was beautiful in a way. We got so close during those years. All the petty stuff, the mother-daughter conflicts, it all just melted away. We talked about everything, her regrets, her dreams, what she wanted for me and Leo. She made me promise to take care of him, made me promise to finish nursing school. But you couldn't. No. Nina's voice caught. She died in February of my junior year, and then it was just me and Leo, and the bills started piling up, and suddenly nursing school felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I had to work. He needed me. You kept the first promise, the one about taking care of him, at the cost of the second one. I think about that a lot, whether she'd be disappointed in me. She wouldn't be. Nina looked up sharply. How do you know? Because any mother who raised someone like you, someone who sacrifices everything for her family, who works herself to exhaustion, who gives kindness to strangers even when she has nothing left, that mother would be proud. She would look at what you've done for Leo and feel nothing but pride. Nina's eyes filled with tears. You don't know that. I do. Because I'm a parent now. And if Sophie grows up to be half the person you are, I'll consider my life a success. The tears spilled over, and Nina didn't wipe them away. She just let them fall, sitting with the grief she'd been carrying for years. Miles reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. He took her hand, and she held on. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being. Two people who'd been broken in different ways, finding something whole in each other. By the 3rd month, their Sunday meetings had expanded beyond the park. They went to farmers markets and museum exhibits and long walks along the waterfront. They cooked dinner at Nina's apartment, Leo joining them with increasingly less suspicion and increasingly more enthusiasm for roasting Miles about everything from his taste in music to his questionable chopping technique. You're holding the knife wrong, Leo said one evening, watching Miles attempt to dice an onion. Have you never cooked before? I've cooked plenty. Burning toast doesn't count. It wasn't burning, it was aggressive browning. Nina laughed from across the kitchen, and the sound made Miles's heart swell. This was what he'd been missing. Not just romance, but family, belonging, the simple joy of shared meals and easy teasing. Sophie joined them too, eventually. The first meeting was carefully orchestrated. A pizza night at the penthouse, neutral territory. But within 20 minutes, Sophie and Leo were arguing about which video game was better, while Nina and Miles watched from the couch, exchanging amused glances. I think they like each other, Nina whispered. Either that or they're about to start a war. Isn't that the same thing with siblings? Miles felt the word land in his chest. Siblings. As if this were already a family, already permanent. He wanted it to be. He wanted it so badly it scared him. But he'd learned not to rush, not to push. Nina had asked for time, and he was giving it to her, even when every instinct screamed at him to move faster. Their first kiss, the first real kiss since the confession, happened on a Thursday, 3.5 months into their new beginning. They'd just finished dinner at Nina's apartment. Leo had wheeled himself to his room to study, and Nina was washing dishes while Miles dried. You don't have to do that, she said, echoing a conversation they'd had once before in what felt like another lifetime. I want to. She smiled, and something in her expression shifted, softened. She set down the dish she was holding and turned to face him. Miles, yeah? I think I'm ready. Ready for what? Instead of answering, she reached up and kissed him. It was different from their kisses before, the ones built on lies and borrowed time. This kiss was honest, real. Two people choosing each other with full knowledge of who they were and what they'd been through. When they finally pulled apart, Nina was crying again. But this time, she was smiling too. I'm still scared, she admitted. Me too. And I don't know if this is going to work. Neither do I. But I want to try, really try. Not just Sunday meetings and careful conversations. I want to try being together. Miles felt his heart crack open, flooding with a joy so intense it almost hurt. "Are you sure?" "No," Nina laughed. "But I'm sure that I love you, and I'm sure that the past few months have been the happiest I've been since my mom died. And I'm sure that when I imagine my future, you're in it, you and Sophie." "I love you too," Miles said, his voice rough. "I've loved you since the moment you bought me coffee with tip money you needed for rent. That was a long time ago. Not long enough for me to stop loving you." They kissed again, longer this time, deeper. And when they finally broke apart, the kitchen light seemed brighter, the apartment warmer, the world somehow more beautiful than it had been moments before. "Leo's going to be insufferable about this," Nina said. "Why?" "Because he's been telling me to give you another chance for weeks. He's going to gloat." Miles grinned. "Let him. He earned it." From down the hall, Leo's voice drifted out. "I can hear you, and yes, I'm going to gloat." They burst out laughing, and Miles realized this was it. This was what he'd been searching for through 26 failed experiments and 2 broken marriages and years of bitter isolation. Not a test passed or failed, just love. Simple, complicated, imperfect love. 6 months after the park bench confession, Miles made a decision. He'd been thinking about it for weeks, turning it over in his mind, running it past Dr. Okonkwo, even asking Sophie for her opinion. Everyone agreed it was the right thing to do. Now he just had to find the courage to do it. He didn't propose. That would come later, when the time was right, when Nina had fully healed from the wounds he'd inflicted. Instead, he did something different, something that he hoped would show her, more than words ever could, that he understood what he'd done wrong and was committed to making it right. He invited her to his office. Nina had never seen Harrington Technologies' headquarters, had deliberately avoided it, she'd admitted, because the reality of his wealth still made her uncomfortable. But Miles had asked her to trust him, and she'd agreed. The building was glass and steel, 40 stories of innovation and industry. Miles met her in the lobby and watched her face as she took it in. The sleek design, the bustling employees, the enormous logo bearing his name. "This is yours," she said quietly. "This is ours," he corrected. "Everyone here, the programmers, the engineers, the janitors, the cafeteria staff. They all built this together. I just had the initial idea." "That's very humble of you." "I'm practicing." She laughed, and some of the tension left her shoulders. Miles led her to the elevator, up to the executive floor, and into a conference room where a stack of documents waited on the table. "What is this?" Nina asked. "The reason I brought you here." Miles sat down and gestured for her to join him. "When I started the experiment, when I was Mike Harrison, I thought I was protecting myself. I thought if I could prove that women were gold diggers, I'd never have to be vulnerable again. Miles, we've talked about this. I know, but I need you to understand something." He pushed the documents toward her. "This is my will. I had it rewritten last month." Nina stared at the papers without touching them. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to know that my money is never going to come between us. If something happens to me, if I die tomorrow, everything goes to Sophie and to a trust fund I've established for Leo's medical care and education." Nina's breath caught. "Miles, let me finish." He took her hand. "You didn't fall in love with Mike Harrison because he was rich. You fell in love with him because of who he was, or who you thought he was. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that the best parts of Mike Harrison were actually me, the real me. Miles Harrington, who grew up poor and worked his way up and sometimes forgets that money isn't the solution to everything. Why are you telling me about your will? Because I need you to know that I'm not testing you anymore. I'm not watching to see if you'll ask about my money or try to position yourself for financial gain. I trust you completely. And I want you to trust me the same way." Nina looked at the documents, then back at him. "I don't need your money, Miles. I never did." "I know. That's exactly the point." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she pushed the papers back across the table. "I don't want to read your will. I don't want to think about a future where you're not in it." She stood up and Miles's heart dropped, until she walked around the table and sat in his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I just want you, the real you, whatever that looks like, whatever complications it brings. I want to figure it out together." Miles held her, breathing in her scent, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. I love you, he said. I know, I love you too. Does this mean you'll move in with me? Nina pulled back, eyebrows raised. That's quite a leap. Is it? We've been doing this dance for months. I know it's soon, but it's not about timing. She bit her lip, thinking. It's about Leo. I can't just leave him. I'm not asking you to leave him. I'm asking you both to come. Miles had anticipated this. The penthouse has 4 bedrooms. One for us, one for Sophie, one for Leo, and one that could be a home office or a guest room or whatever you want. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else. Nina was silent, and Miles forced himself to wait, not to push, to trust that she would make the right decision in her own time. Let me talk to Leo, she finally said. This affects him too. Of course. And I'm not making any promises. I know. But she smiled, that radiant smile that had captured him from the very first day in the diner. I want to say yes. I really, really want to say yes. Then say it. Ask me again in a week. He kissed her instead of arguing, and she kissed him back, and somewhere in that conference room overlooking Seattle, 2 people who'd been broken by life decided to build something new together. The move happened 3 weeks later. It was chaotic in the best possible way. Boxes everywhere, furniture that didn't quite fit, Leo and Sophie arguing about who got the bathroom closest to their room, Nina trying to organize a kitchen that was twice the size of her old one. Miles watched it all with a sense of wonder he'd never expected to feel again. This is insane, Nina said, collapsing onto the couch next to him. How do you have this much closet space? I could fit my entire apartment in your closet. Our closet, he corrected. Our closet. She tested the words, smiling. That's going to take some getting used to. Take all the time you need. From down the hall, the sound of Leo and Sophie's bickering drifted in. I've been here longer, Sophie was saying. I should get to pick. Length of residence doesn't equal authority, Leo countered. Besides, I'm older. By like 10 years, 9. And that's exactly my point. Nina groaned. Should we intervene? Give them 5 minutes. They'll work it out. And they did. Not with resolution, but with the kind of mutual exhaustion that led to compromise. Within an hour, the bathroom schedule had been negotiated. Leo got mornings, Sophie got evenings, everyone stayed out of the master bath. And the 2 of them were sitting together in the living room, teaching each other their favorite video games. That night, after the kids were asleep and the boxes had been temporarily forgotten, Miles and Nina stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city lights. I never imagined this, Nina said quietly. A year ago, I was working double shifts just to keep Leo alive. I'd given up on having a life of my own. And now I'm living in a penthouse with a billionaire who started out lying to me and somehow ended up being the most honest person I know. Miles winced. When you put it that way, I'm not complaining. She turned to face him. I'm saying that life is strange, that the worst moments can lead to the best ones, that sometimes the person who hurts you the most can also be the person who heals you. I'm still sorry for everything I put you through. I know, and I'm still working on forgiving you completely. But I'm getting there. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her. We're getting there. They stood like that for a long time, watching the city breathe beneath them. A year later, Miles proposed. Not in some elaborate gesture, no skywriting, no flash mobs, no hired violinists, just a quiet evening in the park where it had all started, on the bench where he'd confessed his lies and she'd walked away, and then, weeks later, walked back. I bought you something, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Nina's eyes went wide. Miles? Let me say this. He took her hands in his. A year ago, I was the worst version of myself. Bitter, suspicious, convinced that love was just another transaction. And then I met you, and you showed me what real love looks like. Generous love, honest love. Love that pays for dinner with tip money because it's the right thing to do. That was one time. It was enough. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring, elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful without being overwhelming. I spent months trying to find something that matched you, something real and strong and unpretentious, something that said, I see who you are, and I love every part of it. Nina was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I'm not asking you to pretend the pain didn't happen. I'm asking you to believe that the person I've become is worth spending your life with. I'm asking you to marry me, Nina Reyes. Not because I'm rich or powerful or any of the things that don't matter, but because I love you and I want to spend every day proving that I deserve you. She stared at the ring, then at him, then back at the ring. You're asking me to marry Miles Harrington. I'm asking you to marry whoever you need me to be, the real me, the complicated, flawed, trying my best me. Nina laughed through her tears. You're impossible. Is that a yes? She pulled him into a kiss that tasted like salt and joy and second chances. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, yes, yes. The wedding was small, by choice. Just family and close friends, gathered in the backyard of Miles's parents' house, where his mother cried happy tears and his father gave a toast about persistence paying off. Sophie was the flower girl, scattering petals with more enthusiasm than precision. Leo walked Nina down the aisle, his wheelchair decorated with white ribbons, his face a mixture of pride and the obligatory embarrassment of a teenage boy at a romantic event. Nina wore a simple white dress. No designer label, no extravagant price tag, just something that made her look exactly like herself. Miles couldn't stop staring at her. You're supposed to say your vows, the officiant prompted gently. Right. Miles cleared his throat. Nina, when I met you, I was running an experiment to prove that love was a lie. But you weren't a data point. You weren't a test subject. You were a revelation. You showed me that kindness isn't weakness, that trust isn't naivety, that opening your heart to someone is the bravest thing a person can do. I spent years building walls, and you knocked them all down with coffee and pancakes and the simple act of being exactly who you are. Nina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I can't promise our life will be easy. But I can promise you this. I will never lie to you again. I will never test you. I will never treat your love as anything less than the precious gift it is. For the rest of my life, I will work to be worthy of you. The gathered guests were sniffling. Even Leo looked suspiciously misty-eyed. Nina took a breath. Miles, a year ago you broke my heart. You looked at me, at my struggles, my sacrifices, everything I'd worked so hard for, and you turned it into a game. When I found out, I wanted to hate you. I tried to hate you, but hate takes energy I didn't have, and eventually, all I had left was the truth, that somewhere underneath the lies, there was someone worth loving. She squeezed his hands. You didn't earn my forgiveness with money or gestures or grand romantic declarations. You earned it by showing up, every Sunday, with coffee, willing to start over from scratch, willing to be patient, while I figured out whether I could trust you again. That's the man I'm marrying today. Not the billionaire, not the tech mogul. Just the guy who waits at the coffee cart because he knows love is worth the wait. The officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Miles kissed her, and the crowd cheered, and somewhere in the background, Sophie yelled, Finally! They honeymooned in Iceland, watching the northern lights dance across the sky like Nina had always dreamed. They held hands in the freezing air and didn't say much because some moments were too big for words. When they returned home, real life resumed. But it was a different kind of real now, fuller, warmer, shot through with the particular joy that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Leo started college the following fall, his medical bills covered by a trust that Miles had established with scrupulous care, making sure it was structured as a gift with no strings attached. When Nina tried to protest, Miles simply said, He's my brother now, too. Let me help. Nina went back to nursing school, part-time at first, fitting classes around her remaining shifts at the diner. But within 6 months, she'd reduced her hours, then quit entirely, focusing on the degree she'd been forced to abandon years ago. I feel guilty, she admitted one night. Not working, letting you support us. You're not letting me do anything. You're finishing what you started. You're becoming the nurse your mom wanted you to be. But the money is just money. It can't love Leo the way you do. It can't hold Sophie when she has nightmares. It can't make this house feel like a home. He pulled her close. You do all of that. The money just pays bills. It's the least important thing I have to offer. She graduated 2 years later, top of her class. Miles and Sophie and Leo sat in the front row of the ceremony, cheering so loud they got dirty looks from the families around them. "That's my wife!" Miles shouted when Nina's name was called. "That's my wife!" Nina blushed crimson, but she was laughing. Afterward, they went to the Starlight Diner, the place where it had all begun, and ordered blueberry pancakes. "These are what dreams are made of," Miles said, echoing Nina's words from their first meeting. "Still true," she agreed. "Ramon's been making them for 33 years now, and they've only gotten better." Ramon himself came out of the kitchen to congratulate Nina, his weathered face creased with a smile. "Always knew you'd do something special," he said. "Too good for this place." "Never too good. Just ready for something different. You come back any time. Free pancakes for life. That's the Ramon guarantee." They ate their pancakes and watched the diner fill with the breakfast crowd. Nurses from the hospital, construction workers, Mr. Patterson in his usual booth. The same scene Nina had navigated for years, but seen now through different eyes. "Do you miss it?" Miles asked. "Sometimes. The routine, the regulars, the way you get to know people's stories through their coffee orders." She shrugged. "But I don't miss the exhaustion, the fear, the feeling that one bad week could destroy everything I'd built." "You'll never have to feel that way again." "I know." She reached across the table and took his hand. "And that's not about the money, Miles. It's about you. About knowing that whatever happens, I'm not alone anymore." He lifted her hand and kissed it. "Neither am I." 5 years after their wedding, on a Sunday morning in late spring, the Harrington household was chaos. Sophie, now 13, was refusing to come down for breakfast because her hair was doing a thing, and she couldn't possibly be seen by anyone until it was fixed. Leo, home from college for the weekend, was attempting to help but mostly making things worse. Nina was burning pancakes while simultaneously trying to prevent their 3-year-old son, James, from climbing onto the kitchen counter. "Miles," Nina called. "A little help here." Miles emerged from the bedroom, still half asleep, to find his wife juggling a spatula, a toddler, and what appeared to be a minor grease fire. "I've got him," he said, scooping James up with practiced ease. "Come on, buddy. Let's give Mommy some space." "Pancakes," James demanded. "Pancakes are coming, but first we need to let Mommy not burn down the kitchen." "I heard that," Nina called. "You were meant to." By the time they all made it to the table, the pancakes were only slightly charred. Sophie's hair had been deemed acceptable, and James was happily smearing syrup on every available surface. "Remember when breakfast used to be peaceful?" Leo asked, dodging a flying piece of fruit. "No," Miles and Nina said in unison. "Fair point." Miles looked around the table at this family he'd somehow stumbled into. His brilliant daughter, his brave stepson, his chaotic toddler, his incredible wife. 5 years ago, he'd been a bitter man running cruel experiments, convinced that love was a lie told by fools. Now he was the fool, the happiest fool in Seattle. "What are you smiling about?" Nina asked, catching his expression. "Nothing. Everything." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "Just grateful, I guess." "For what?" "For you. For this. For the fact that you gave me a second chance even though I didn't deserve it." Nina leaned over and kissed his cheek, ignoring James's gleeful "Ew." "You've spent 5 years earning that second chance," she said. "Every day, without fail. I'd say you've more than proven yourself." "Still feels like I got the better end of the deal." "That's because you did." But she was smiling. "Now eat your pancakes before they get cold." Miles obeyed, watching his family laugh and argue and exist together in all their imperfect glory. He'd built a tech empire from nothing, made hundreds of millions of dollars, been on magazine covers and Forbes lists and all the markers of success the world said mattered. But this noisy, chaotic, syrup-covered breakfast table, this was his greatest achievement. This was what he'd been searching for all along. After breakfast, while Leo took Sophie and James to the park, Miles and Nina found themselves alone in the kitchen, doing dishes side by side, just like they had in her tiny apartment years ago. "Do you ever think about how we started?" Nina asked, scrubbing a pan. "The experiment, the lies." "Sometimes."
Usually when I'm trying to fall asleep and my brain decides to remind me of every terrible thing I've ever done. Does it still bother you? Miles considered the question. Not the way it used to. I've made peace with who I was. But I never want to forget it either. I think remembering keeps me honest. That's healthy. She handed him the pan to dry. I don't think about it much anymore, honestly. It feels like it happened to different people. In a way, it did. Mike Harrison and the Nina who worked double shifts, they're not us. Not anymore. No, they're not. Nina turned off the water and faced him. But I'm glad they existed, because without them, we wouldn't have this. Silver lining to a very dark cloud. Something like that.
They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of knowing someone so well that words become optional. Later that afternoon, while James napped and the older kids were occupied with their own pursuits, Miles and Nina walked to their park bench. They didn't go there every Sunday anymore. Life was too full, too busy, but they made the pilgrimage whenever they could, a reminder of where they'd been and how far they'd come. I've been thinking, Nina said as they settled onto the familiar wooden slats. Dangerous. Shut up, she elbowed him. I've been thinking about writing something, about us, our story. Like a book? More like a long essay, or maybe a series of blog posts, something about second chances and trust, and how love can survive even the worst betrayals. That's beautiful. Or completely narcissistic. I can't decide. Miles laughed. Write it. The world could use more stories about people screwing up and finding redemption, even if it makes you look bad. Especially if it makes me look bad. I deserve to look bad. I was terrible. You were. Nina leaned into him. But you got better. Because of you. Because of you. You did the work, Miles, the therapy, the self-reflection, the daily choice to be better. I just gave you the opportunity. That's more than anyone else would have done. Maybe. Or maybe I was just stubborn enough to see what was underneath all the armor. They watched a young couple walk by, holding hands, lost in each other the way new lovers always are. Do you think they'll make it? Nina asked. Who knows? Love is a gamble. You show up, you try your best, and you hope the other person does the same. That's very philosophical. I've had a lot of therapy. Nina laughed, and the sound echoed across the park, bright and free. I love you, she said. Have I mentioned that lately? Not in the last hour. Well, I do. Completely. Irrevocably. Even when you leave your socks on the bathroom floor and forget to put the toilet seat down. That's very generous of you. I'm a generous person. She stood up and extended her hand. Come on. James will be waking up soon, and someone needs to make sure Leo hasn't taught Sophie any more inappropriate jokes. Miles took her hand and rose. But before they started walking, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in the middle of the park, not caring who saw. Thank you, he said into her hair. For what? For everything. For the second chance. For the family. For showing me that the person I wanted to be was actually possible. Nina pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You showed yourself that, Miles. I just believed in you until you could believe in yourself. They walked home hand in hand through streets that had witnessed their entire journey, from strangers to lovers to enemies to strangers again, to something stronger than any of those words could capture. The penthouse was chaos when they returned, exactly as they'd left it. James was awake and demanding attention. Sophie was complaining about homework. Leo was making grilled cheese sandwiches that were somehow both burnt and undercooked. Miles looked at it all, the noise, the mess, the beautiful imperfection of a life built on trust and forgiveness, and felt his heart expand in his chest. This was what love looked like, not tests passed or failed, not experiments designed to prove the worst about people, just showing up day after day and choosing each other despite all the reasons not to. He'd spent years believing that love was a transaction, a performance, a lie told by fools. He'd been wrong. Love was Nina paying for dinner with tip money she couldn't afford because he was embarrassed and she was kind. Love was Leo wheeling himself to a coffee shop to defend his sister's honor. Love was Sophie asking when she could see Nina again, even after everything fell apart. Love was the second chance he'd been given, and the third, and the fourth, and every day since. Miles stepped into the chaos, picked up his son, kissed his wife, and smiled. This was his life now, and he wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.